If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1. Queens, New York City. Ring 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 ring. As soon as the school bell at Midtown High School rang, Kain bolted out of the classroom with his school bag in hand, eager to leave. His friend Carl, noticing this, quickly called out, "Hey, Kain, you promised to play video games with me today." Carl, I actually said next time, which means the day after tomorrow," Kain replied, briefly poking his head back into the classroom doorway. He added, "Next time, Carl." Cunning Kain. Are we sure he's talking about tomorrow? Carl muttered under his breath. Kain had used the same excuse the last time, and they still hadn't completed the level that required 2 players. It was starting to feel like a pattern. Another student passed by Carl, chuckling. If you remind Kain every day, he might actually realize it's tomorrow sometime next year. Carl sighed, he loves guns more than hanging out with his best friend. He grumbled to himself and packed his things, determined to beat the level solo if it came to that. If he didn't pass by his 200th try, Carl swore he'd drag Kain over, no excuses. Kain had definitely changed, and it wasn't just the small stuff. Carl could sense something different in him, especially over the past 3 years. It's now the year 2000, and Kain has been in this new Marvel world for exactly 3 years. When he first realized he'd somehow crossed into this universe, he experienced a whirlwind of emotions: fear, excitement, confusion. But now, after settling into his new life, he could remain calm in the face of the extraordinary events happening around him. Why is he so sure it's the Marvel world? Kain managed to use some inheritance from his parents to invest in various ventures, including stocks in Stark Industries. As he watched the company's progression and the events unfolding around him, he became certain he was in the universe of superheroes and villains. Inheriting his family's estate had been a challenge, but thanks to his parents' foresight, they'd hired a lawyer before their deaths to ensure the process went smoothly. Kain ended up with 34% of the shares in a private hospital, $1 million in cash, 3 homes, and 2 cars. While taxes and legal fees ate into a good portion of it, Kain was left with more than enough to get by. Determined to make the most of his situation, Kain invested $600,000 into the stock market, benefiting from insider knowledge of companies like Stark Industries and other tech giants. He rode the wave of the dot-com boom, growing his wealth significantly. By the year 2000, he was sitting on tens of millions of dollars, enough to live comfortably for the rest of his life. With such wealth, he could easily have settled into a life of luxury, private villas, full-time staff, and gourmet meals every day. But Kain knew better than to let his guard down. This was the Marvel world, a place filled with superheroes, villains, and world-ending catastrophes. Wealth wouldn't save him if he didn't have the means to protect himself. Thankfully, Kain had a personal advantage, a stronger memory and increased focus, which he attributed to the new body he found himself in after the time travel. These gifts allowed him to quickly excel academically, earning the top spot in his senior year at Midtown High School. Between his grades and financial status, he had his pick of universities, but his true focus lay elsewhere. Kain dedicated hours each week to visiting a shooting range in the suburbs, practicing with firearms. For someone without superhuman abilities, guns were the most practical way to ensure his safety. After leaving school, Kain hopped on his motorcycle and rode to the training range, where someone was already waiting for him at the entrance. "Hey, Kain." Right on time as always, the coach, Jimmy, greeted him with a grin. Jimmy was used to Kain's regular visits and enthusiasm for shooting. Having a wealthy client like Kain was good for business, so Jimmy was always keen to offer personalized attention. "What's on the agenda today?" Jimmy asked. "Same as usual." Kain nodded. "Same guns, same drills." Jimmy chuckled. "You know, with your skills, you could enter competitions. You wouldn't win every time, but you'd definitely place in the top 10. Kain grinned but didn't respond. He knew his shooting skills were solid, but competitions weren't his goal. His objective was simple: survival. In a world where gods, monsters, and madmen roamed, being well armed might give him a chance to stay alive. Jimmy led Kain to the range, and soon, the rhythmic sound of gunfire filled the air. Bang! 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 Kain's shots were sharp and precise. By the end of the session, Jimmy couldn't help but be impressed again. "You've really improved, Kain. Your accuracy is better than ever." "Thanks," Kain replied, wiping sweat from his brow. He grabbed a bottle of water and took a few sips before turning to Jimmy. So, about that thing I asked you to look into. Jimmy hesitated for a moment, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Kain, what you're asking for, those are restricted weapons. It's dangerous. Why not just hire bodyguards if you are worried about safety? Kain gave him a knowing smile. Come on, Jimmy. You know I have a house in the suburbs. It's not like I'm stockpiling for a war. I just want to be prepared. Plus, you'll make some extra cash out of it. Jimmy sighed, realizing Kain wouldn't be swayed. After a moment, he pulled a small note from his pocket and handed it over. Go to this address, he said in a low voice. Tell them you're a friend of Jimmy's, and they'll help you out. Kain pocketed the note, giving Jimmy a nod of thanks. The truth was, in this unpredictable world, being prepared was a necessity, not just a hobby. He didn't know when things might spiral out of control, when some supervillain or cosmic entity might bring chaos to his doorstep. But when that time came, Kain intended to be ready. Chapter 2. Kain drove to the location Jimmy had given him. Though it was somewhat out of the way, it was still within New York City, not far from the suburbs. After parking his car, he stepped out and approached the door of a rather inconspicuous building. The place looked like a typical gun store, the kind you'd expect to see in the US. Rows of standard firearms lined the walls, the usual array of rifles, shotguns, and handguns. But Kain wasn't here for the legal merchandise, he had something else in mind, something more discreet and less legal. Boss! Kain called out after entering the store. A man slowly rose from behind the cash register. He was a disheveled, middle-aged man with an unkempt beard that nearly blended into the messy mop of hair on his head. He looked more like a caveman than a gun shop owner. If you're old enough to buy a gun, feel free to look around, the man grunted, barely glancing at Kain. The shopkeeper clearly thought Kain was just another young man intrigued by the idea of owning a firearm, probably to impress his friends. Most kids like him barely had enough cash to buy the cheapest shotgun in the store, let alone something more substantial. Take your pick, the shopkeeper added. If it's your first time here, I'll even give you a 10% discount. I've already chosen, Kain replied calmly, stepping up to the counter. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and placed it on the counter. The shop owner unfolded the paper and scanned the contents, his brow furrowing as he saw the list. Several of the items were highly illegal. Kain quickly added, I was sent by Jimmy. The shopkeeper's frown deepened, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. Why didn't he just send you to Stark Industries? He asked, his tone thick with sarcasm. Kain smirked, Stark doesn't break the law for small money. Now, name your price. The shop owner's face softened slightly as the conversation took a more familiar turn. He knew this game money talks, and it seemed like Kain was prepared to play. Though the request was risky, it was clear Kain was willing to pay a high price for the illegal items on his list. Kain took a wad of cash from his jacket and slapped it onto the counter. $30,000 as a deposit, he said firmly. The rest when the deal's done, and all cash. The shopkeeper's eyes flickered at the sight of the money. Kain continued, besides, you know Jimmy. He wouldn't send me your way unless he trusted you. The shop owner hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. $30,000 up front was no small amount, especially in the year 2000. The total deal wouldn't exceed $150,000, but that was still a hefty sum for a gun shop owner. Kain was asking for a mix of items, mostly pistols, rifles, a large quantity of ammunition, and even a few grenades, definitely not things you'd find on the shelves of a regular store. Finally, the shopkeeper nodded. All right. I'll have everything ready in 5 days. Leave an address. Kain scribbled down an address and phone number on a piece of paper. This is my phone. Call me before you come by. The address he provided wasn't his primary residence. It was another house his parents had left him, located just a few blocks away, with a large garage. It was the perfect spot for receiving deliveries like this away from prying eyes. The shopkeeper, satisfied, pocketed the cash. 5 days, he repeated. I'll call when it's ready. With the deal sealed, Kain left the store and drove off, feeling a mixture of excitement and anticipation. The moment he got home, he threw himself back into his studies. The reason he was top of his class at Midtown High School wasn't just because of his natural intelligence but because of his ability to retain and absorb knowledge quickly. Yet, unlike most kids his age, Kain had no interest in spending his free time playing video games or lounging around. He had bigger plans. Kain's self-study revolved around medical knowledge. He wasn't pursuing medicine just because he owned shares in a hospital. It was for survival. Guns and ammunition could protect him from physical threats, but medicine was his safeguard in the event of injury. His parents had left behind a library of medical texts, which he absorbed voraciously, practicing bandaging, suturing, and diagnosing illnesses on dummies he kept in the house. So far, he had a 100% success rate though, as he mused to himself, it would be a different challenge to apply these skills to real people in life-or-death situations. That night, he felt a buzz of excitement. In 5 days, when his shipment arrived, he'd finally be ready to test his system properly. Kain's cheat ability, his mysterious system, was the key to his survival and success in this Marvel world. Sure, it was dangerous to dabble in the illegal arms trade, but Kain had long since accepted the risks. As an ordinary human in an extraordinary world, there were few paths to real power. The system was his best option. He'd thought long and hard about it. The life of a rich, ordinary man wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. He wanted power. He wanted to see what other worlds had to offer. As he relaxed with a glass of red wine that evening, he activated the system interface, a transparent panel only visible to him. The interface was simple but functional, displaying his next task, selecting a world. The system's unique ability allowed him to connect to other worlds and establish trade deals, but there was a catch: the first trade in any world was always the riskiest. Kain had to negotiate the deal in person, with no guarantee of success. However, once that first deal was made, the system would allow him to freely travel between the Marvel world and the newly discovered one. Additionally, the system had 50 storage slots, each capable of holding massive quantities of items. The storage capacity was immense. One slot could store up to 999 units of a single type of item, with each unit representing up to 100 kilograms. If Kain chose to trade something basic, like flour, he could store nearly 5,000 tons of it in his system. This storage feature was invaluable for transporting large quantities of goods across worlds. Risk and reward danced closely together. But if Kain could survive the initial danger, the rewards would be immense. He could build wealth and power, not just in the Marvel world but across multiple worlds. "I'll take the risk," Kain muttered to himself, finishing his wine. He had no interest in a quiet, luxurious life. He wanted to see and experience more, much more. And with the system at his side, he was ready to take his first step toward a much larger destiny. Chapter 3. Hey, Kain, you've been avoiding me lately. If you don't come over and help me beat that video game, you'll lose the best trader you've got. Carl Shelton playfully slung his arm around Kain's neck, trying to guilt-trip him into hanging out. Carl's father was a well-known stockbroker on Wall Street. Growing up with a father immersed in trading, Carl had become skilled in navigating the stock market. Kain, aware of his talent, had entrusted him with some of his money. Carl, with his father's connections, had helped him open a stock account far quicker than Kain could have managed on his own. Now, Carl followed Kain's instructions and handled trades, and both had profited handsomely from it. Carl, cautious by nature, had only invested modest amounts because of his father's constant warnings about the unpredictability of the stock market. Kain, on the other hand, was more daring, and as a result, his returns were far greater. Although Carl didn't manage most of Kain's funds anymore, the $1 million or so Kain had entrusted him with was still significant. "I'm not avoiding you, Carl. I just think you need something more than the game." Kain pulled out a stack of study materials from his bag, marked with his own handwritten notes. He had been using them to prepare for school exams. Carl flipped through the pages, his eyes widening at the extensive notes. "Kain, I'm not aiming for Columbia University or anything. You know I'm not the studious type." Kain shot him a serious look. "You saying you don't need this? Look at these notes, man. Do you know how long it took me to prepare this for you?" Carl gave an apologetic grin. "Bro, you know me. I'd be sent straight to the ICU if I tried to study all this." He could see how much effort Kain had put into compiling the material, but studying was the last thing on Carl's mind. "Forget it. Maybe I misjudged your dedication to academics," Kain said, brushing it off. "But I do need your help with something." Carl, always quick to help when it didn't involve schoolwork, jumped at the chance. "Anything, man. You know I've got your back." Kain smiled. I need you to find me a warehouse, something with good security. Also, track down a reliable supermarket supplier. I might need it soon. Carl raised an eyebrow. You opening a supermarket now? Dude, this isn't a smart move. You're going to ditch our Wall Street Lightning Group. Kain rolled his eyes. There is no Lightning Group, Carl. And I'm not opening a supermarket. Just do this for me, all right? With that, Kain ended their conversation as it was nearly time for class. His days at school had become more relaxed since he was one of the top students. As long as he didn't disrupt anyone or break any laws, the teachers left him alone. After all, a kid already accepted into Columbia University wasn't someone they worried about. But Kain was growing tired of school. It felt like a waste of time when there was so much more to learn, especially with his recent acquisition of the trading system. The thought of spending another 4 or 5 years stuck in a classroom, waiting to use the system's potential, made him impatient. It was like being a game fan holding a brand new game but being told to practice skills before playing. He simply couldn't wait. A few days later, Kain arrived at his parents' unused house. The place was large but isolated, which made it perfect for what he had planned. When night fell, a minivan pulled up in front of the house. After flashing the headlights 3 times as a signal, Kain opened the garage door to let the vehicle inside. All your stuff is here. Bullets in the boxes, firearms, and rocket launchers in the cases. Once I leave, I don't know you, and I never sold you anything, the owner of the gun shop grumbled as he helped unload the goods. Kain inspected everything closely. Pistols, rifles, submachine guns all in pristine condition. He had experience with guns, but the rocket launcher was new territory. He hefted it once, just to feel the weight. Everything seemed perfect. No problems here, boss. Pleasure doing business with you, Kain said, handing over the remaining balance to the gun shop owner. Call me George, the man said, pocketing the cash. Next time you come, you'll get a fair price. I don't cheat my regulars. As George drove off into the night, Kain began organizing the firearms and ammunition. He loaded all the clips and carefully stored the weapons in the system's space inventory. The trading system space was vast, allowing him to store large quantities of goods. The sheer convenience of being able to summon or stow weapons in the blink of an eye brought a satisfied smile to his face. Now, let's search for the first trading world, Kain muttered to himself, eager to see what lay ahead. The system's panel blinked to life, displaying a chaotic whirl of stars and lights. After a few moments, a bright star materialized on the screen, indicating the target world. Kain tapped the starlight, and a scene unfolded before his eyes. It was a battlefield, unlike any he had ever seen. Instead of guns, the fighters used strange hand signs to manipulate elements fire, water, wind, and lightning. Some hurled shuriken and kunai, while others engaged in hand-to-hand combat. In another part of the world, civilians went about their daily lives, shopping in markets, and traders laughed together in izakayas. This is the world of shinobi, Kain murmured, intrigued by the strange yet familiar imagery. A thrill of excitement coursed through him. This was the first world the system had located, and he was about to step into it, armed with weapons from Earth. The thought of what opportunities and dangers awaited him made his heart race. But he was ready. Danger and opportunity coexisted, and Kain was determined to make the most of both. Chapter 4. The world of Naruto, once a thriving indigenous planet, could have evolved with a harmonious coexistence of extraordinary powers and advancing technology. However, the arrival of the alien Satsuki clan drastically altered the course of this planet's development. The first significant change came when Satsuki Kagaya planted a sacred tree on the planet. After betraying her fellow Satsuki, Ishiki, she performed a ritual to offer sacrifices to the sacred tree and eventually consumed the chakra fruit herself. Her ideals, however, clashed with those of her sons, Satsuki Hago Romo and Satsuki Hamura, leading to her eventual sealing. Hago Romo, also known as the Sage of Six Paths, later spread chakra across the world. After his son Indra developed the art of ninjutsu, shinobi, or ninja, began to rise to prominence, shaping the history of the world with their battles and exploits. Kain pondered over the images he had just seen from the system. It looks like a war is going on. I'm not sure which one though. If it's the Fourth Shinobi World War, I should probably hold off for now. But it can't be those ninjas were wearing different forehead protectors. Konoha, IWA. This has to be a conflict between villages, not the unified force of the Fourth War. He recalled that the Fourth Shinobi World War was a massive, cataclysmic event. If he misjudged the timing and got caught in it, he might not even make it out alive, especially with the looming threat of the infinite Tsukuyomi. Since it's still wartime, I should reconsider my initial plan for trading food supplies. I'll adjust the inventory and include more medicines, leaving behind detailed instructions, he mused. Kain's father had taken him to various private receptions over the years, and he had made some useful connections, including several individuals working in pharmaceutical companies. He could source a large batch of medicines from them, including antibiotics, anti-inflammatory drugs, painkillers, and vitamins, not to mention essential medical equipment. While Kain could carry a significant amount of supplies into the shinobi world, he faced a critical question: what could he get in return? The currency in the ninja world would be useless once he returned to his own world, and the value of their money would be equivalent to toilet paper in the modern economy. Gold was a potential option, but gold wasn't widely used in the shinobi world, at least not in the anime he had watched. The only time gold was ever significant was with the fourth Kazekage in the Sand Village, and I'm not exactly equipped to mine or trade for gold. Plus, it's too risky to deal with gold just for some returns. I might as well stick to business on Wall Street for that, Kain thought. His real goal wasn't simply making money, he had plenty of that already. What Kain wanted was access to the extraordinary powers of the shinobi world. Chakra, the energy that fueled the ninja's abilities, was the most mysterious and alluring power in that world. But chakra was native to that universe, and even if Kain could somehow learn how to extract it, his chakra reserves would likely be minuscule compared to the shinobi born and raised in that world. If I want to obtain true extraordinary power, I'll probably need something like Hashirama cells, Kain muttered. He knew that Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage, had cells that were famous for their regenerative and chakra-boosting properties. If he could get his hands on something like that, his chances of gaining real power would increase significantly. But for now, all of that was still just wishful thinking. He couldn't even determine the exact time period in the shinobi world yet, so making detailed plans was premature. All he could do was focus on his preparations, stockpiling medicines, weapons, and gear. Good thing I already know Japanese, Kain thought with a smirk. That would at least save him from the hassle of dealing with language barriers. Kain grabbed his phone and called Carl. Hey, Carl, how's the warehouse and supplier situation coming along? It took a moment for Carl, groggy from sleep, to respond. Kain? Dude, do you know what time it is? The American Constitution protects my sacred right to sleep. It's noon, Carl. Are you still half asleep? Should I call your dad and tell him you've been gaming all night again? Carl woke up immediately, his tone shifting. Kain. I was just joking, man. The warehouse and the people you asked for are all sorted. I can show you the place this afternoon. Perfect. I'll be there in half an hour. Kain hung up and headed to his father's study. He found an old phone book that listed the contacts of various business associates. Scanning through it, he found the name and number of a pharmaceutical manager he remembered from a while back. He dialed the number. Jess? It's Kain Pent. I'd like to do some business with you. Jess, the department manager, wasn't particularly high-ranking, but Kain held some sway as a major shareholder in a private hospital in New York. For someone like Jess, Kain was a valuable client, especially when the order involved $500,000 worth of medical supplies. After making arrangements with Jess, Kain met Carl in the afternoon to check out the warehouse. It was secure, spacious, and located in a quiet area with few people around, perfect for what Kain needed in the early stages of his plan. Once he had more funds, he'd invest in a network of secure warehouses, but for now, this would do. Too many goods appearing and disappearing too frequently from one location would attract suspicion, so it was crucial to stay under the radar. With the warehouse rented, Kain dropped Carl off and made his way to finalize the pharmaceutical order. After that, he planned to gather other essentials like food and clothing. In the shinobi world, it wasn't just medical supplies that would be in high demand. If the war he entered was the Second or Third Shinobi World War, food could become just as valuable. Kain knew he had to establish a foothold in the shinobi world, much like Kato had. But unlike Kato, who died after relying on hired samurai and rogue ninjas, Kain planned to be smarter. He would use modern weapons, firearms, and ammunition to defend himself and expand his influence. Even a Chunin-level ninja could fall to the sheer firepower of a well-coordinated firearms team. Guns may not be as flashy as jutsu, but they're just as deadly if used correctly, Kain thought. Rifles, with their rapid-fire capabilities, could easily match or surpass the lethality of the average shinobi's shuriken. Even a Chunin without proper defensive jutsu would struggle against a barrage of bullets. Kain requested a long-term leave from school, preparing to dive into the shinobi world fully. Before setting off, he gave Carl some extra funds to invest in the stock market. War was brewing on the global stage once more, and whether it was oil or gold, there was always profit to be made. With his preparations almost complete, Kain's mind was already in the world of ninjas. Soon, he would take his first step into a new world filled with both danger and opportunity. Chapter 5. It's really desolate during the war. Kain muttered to himself as he took in the empty, war-torn landscape around him. He had just arrived in the world of Naruto via a trading system that allowed him to travel between dimensions, but he hadn't been able to choose his exact landing location. Now, he needed to find a suitable trading partner quickly. Only then could he place the trading tokens required to keep him in this world. I've only got 2 days, Kain thought, and every time I shuttle back and forth, I have to appear within 50 miles of the transaction mark. The mark is tied to the trading partner, too. What a ridiculous rule. He grimaced at the thought. I need to find someone who'll stick around for a long time, but I only get this one chance. If I mess it up, I can't come back. Kain was anxious. If he didn't find a trading partner within the allotted time, the world would be lost to him, and the trading system would reset, sending him off to a new, unfamiliar world. Finding a person who was both willing to trade and had a long lifespan seemed like an impossible task, especially given the war-torn state of the world. On top of that, once the trading token was bound to this world, Kain would be stuck for at least 2 years before he could replace it with a new one. Why does this system have to be so complicated? And this weather? Kain glanced up at the sky, raindrops falling steadily on his face. It's been raining ever since I got here. He was grateful that he had packed a full set of daily necessities, including umbrellas and rain gear, but after 2 hours of trudging through the wilderness, he was getting frustrated. He had yet to encounter another soul, let alone someone who might make for a viable trading partner. He had no clue where he was, and the idea of missing out on the shinobi plane made his stomach churn. As a wealthy man with time to spare, Kain wasn't out of shape. He had trained in martial arts and firearms, so the physical act of walking for hours wasn't a problem for him. The real issue was not knowing how long it would take to find someone, and whether that person would be a suitable trading partner. If things went south, he could always retreat to the Marvel world he knew and give up on the shinobi world. Am I really going to be this unlucky with my first trade? The Pent family has believed in God for generations, and yet here I am, the only heir, wandering around in the rain in some war-torn world. Where's the divine protection? He walked for another hour before he finally came across something, a ruined building in the distance. It wasn't much, but it offered temporary shelter from the rain. Kain noticed the remnants of battles, scorched earth and debris littering the ground. The war had left its mark on this place. He didn't know which direction would lead him to a village, or even a battlefield where he might find someone to trade with. Still, he reasoned that if he found himself in real danger, he'd return to the Marvel universe as soon as possible. There was no point risking his life for a failed transaction. Anyone there? Kain called out, keeping his hand close to his gun, his voice echoing through the ruins. After waiting a few minutes with no response, he decided to release a drone to scout the area for potential threats. Once the drone confirmed the coast was clear, Kain sat down to rest. He was running low on energy. If he wasn't so close to a potential battlefield, he would have treated himself to a steak, but for now, he could only snack on some chocolate, jerky, and energy drinks. As he ate, Kain monitored the drone's feed, but it didn't reveal anything useful. 4 hours down, 44 to go, he said to himself, glancing at his watch. Suddenly, a soft noise caught his attention. Kain immediately dropped the energy drink, grabbed his gun, and pointed it in the direction of the sound. "Who's there?" he shouted. For a tense few seconds, there was no response. Kain fired a few warning shots into the ground, the bullets making sharp, loud sounds as they struck the earth. "I'll say it one more time. Come out, or I won't hesitate to shoot. Don't shoot. I'll come out." A small, frightened voice called out from behind a large boulder. Slowly, a boy with orange hair emerged. He couldn't have been older than 10, with a stubborn but scared expression on his face. Kain didn't lower his guard, keeping the gun trained on the boy. "Are you alone? What are you doing here?" I scanned this area earlier, and there was no one around. I was just looking for something to eat, the boy replied nervously. I'm homeless. I was too hungry, so I came here to see if I could find any food. Kain eyed the boy suspiciously. There aren't any villages nearby. You're out here by yourself looking for food? Sounds like you're not being honest with me. Even though the boy was just a kid, Kain knew better than to trust him completely. He kept his distance, ready to return to the Marvel world at a moment's notice if things took a turn for the worse. The boy, sensing Kain's distrust, raised his hands in a defensive gesture. I'm telling the truth. I came here because I want to find a ninja and become an apprentice. I'm just trying to learn ninjutsu. I was passing through and saw this place, so I hid from the rain. Looking for a ninja apprentice. Kain raised an eyebrow. He took a closer look at the boy's orange hair and asked, "What's your name?" Yahiko. My name is Yahiko. Kain's eyes widened slightly. Yahiko. That name meant something to him. He quickly deduced that this was the time of the Second Shinobi World War, and Yahiko, along with his two companions, had yet to meet Jiraiya. All right, Yahiko. Call your two friends over, Kain said, rummaging through his backpack. He pulled out 3 pieces of bread and ham, throwing them over to the boy. I've got food for all of you. Yahiko's eyes widened in surprise. He glanced at the bread and ham and then back at Kain, realizing that this stranger knew more than he let on. The fact that he had enough food for 3 people told Yahiko that Kain knew about Konan and Nagato, his companions. After a brief hesitation, Yahiko called out, Konan. Nagato. Come out. He's got food, he's a good guy. Kain scoffed inwardly at Yahiko's naivety. A good guy? He was a businessman, a capitalist. Goodness wasn't in the job description. But for now, he had found the trading partners he needed. Chapter 6. It's so delicious, mister. Yahiko exclaimed with his mouth full of buttered bread and ham. He was struggling to speak clearly with the food spilling out, which made Kain frown and take a step back, visibly uncomfortable. Noticing this, the blue-haired Konan quickly intervened. Yahiko, swallow before you speak. I'm sorry, Uncle Kain. We've just been so hungry for days, and your bread is amazing, Konan apologized with a polite bow. Kain sighed and corrected her, don't call me uncle. I'm not that old, and we're not that close. Just call me Mr. Kain. He then shifted the conversation. So, where are you 3 headed? And which shinobi are you planning to learn ninjutsu from? Yahiko, who had barely swallowed his food, replied with renewed energy, we're not sure exactly where, but we saw Konoha shinobi fighting Hanzo last time, and they survived. We want to find them and learn ninjutsu to change the land of rain. Kain shook his head slightly, causing Yahiko to narrow his eyes in annoyance. What, Mr. Kain, you don't believe us? Yahiko asked, clearly feeling challenged. No, it's not that. Your dream is admirable, keep at it. Kain wasn't interested in arguing with the boy. He found it pointless to debate with idealistic children, especially when they lacked the wisdom to see beyond their immediate desires. What he was really after had nothing to do with their childish dreams. Yahiko, undeterred, continued, we saw the Konoha shinobi didn't leave any of their dead behind after fighting Hanzo. If we keep heading toward the land of fire, we'll catch up with them eventually. That's helpful, Kain mused to himself. He knew Yahiko was most likely leading him toward the legendary Sun and Tsunade, Orochimaru, and Jiraiya. Ideally, he would prefer to bind his world trading contract with someone like Tsunade or Orochimaru. They were bound to stay in Konoha before the Third Shinobi War erupted, and they wielded enough influence to be valuable trading partners. Jiraiya, on the other hand, might stick around to mentor Yahiko and his friends. Either way, establishing a relationship with Konoha shinobi was a strategic move. If things went south, Kain could always retreat back to his home world without hesitation. Konan, who had been observing Kain's thoughtful expression, gently asked, Mr. Kain, what are you thinking about? Kain smirked slightly. I was just considering a deal. How about this, I'll follow you 3 and help you find the Konoha shinobi. In return, you help me find them quickly. As payment for your services, here's some milk and chocolate, he said, pulling out 3 boxes of milk and some candy from his backpack. Yahiko's eyes lit up at the sight of the treats. Milk and chocolate were luxuries even before the war, and now they were nearly impossible to find. Still, he couldn't help but be cautious. What do you want with the Konoha shinobi, Mr. Kain? Yahiko asked, his wariness showing through. Kain chuckled and waved a hand dismissively. I'm a businessman, kid, not someone looking to become a ninja like you. I'm just here for a potential trade, nothing more. Do I look like someone who's going to train to become a shinobi at my age? Be mature. Feeling slightly embarrassed, Yahiko nodded. All right, Mr. Kain, we agree. Thank you, he said, immediately dividing the milk and chocolate among Konan and Nagato. They all pocketed the chocolate, knowing it was too precious to eat right away. With the deal set, Kain stood up and dusted himself off. Good. Now let's move. I don't have much time left, he urged. He was down to just over a day to secure a trading partner. If Tsunade or Orochimaru were unwilling to work with him, he'd have no choice but to bind the trade to one of Yahiko's companions, Nagato or Konan. The group set out toward the Land of Fire, where they hoped to find the Konoha shinobi. Though Yahiko's idealism made him seem naive, Kain had to admit the boy had good instincts. Yahiko had correctly deduced the direction the Sunin would take after their battle with Hanzo, which was impressive for a kid who hadn't received formal training yet. The trio's lack of physical stamina, however, was a problem. They were often exhausted and had to stop frequently to rest. Kain, always impatient, used chocolate and other small treats to motivate them to keep going. His tactic worked. Fueled by the promise of more food, Yahiko, Konan, and Nagato pushed themselves harder than ever before. After hours of walking through the rain, the sun began to set, and they finally spotted movement ahead. There they are, up ahead. Yahiko whispered excitedly, but his eagerness was tempered with a sense of responsibility. Mr. Kain, should we just walk straight up to them? You're looking for their help, right? The only advantage you have is your youth and sincerity. I'm a businessman, not some spy. Moving suspiciously will only make them more wary, and that could ruin any chance of negotiating with them. Besides, they've probably already noticed us, Kain advised, brushing past Yahiko. Yahiko frowned but ultimately agreed with Kain's logic. All right, Konan, Nagato, stay back for now. If something goes wrong, you two run, he instructed before hurrying after Kain. As they approached, they heard voices coming from what looked like a makeshift shelter in the ruins of a building. Kain caught snippets of a conversation between two people. The war's finally winding down, a woman's voice said. Once Sand Shinobi retreats, we can return to the village for some much-needed rest. Let's hope the other villages calm down too. We can't handle another long battle, Tsunade, replied a man's voice, though it was cut off as they noticed Kain and Yahiko approaching. Kain decided to speak up before things got tense. Shinobi of Konoha, we mean no harm. We're not from Omegakure. I'm just here to discuss a business proposal. The man they had heard speaking earlier, Jiraiya, appeared in the rain with his hands ready for combat, but the woman, Tsunade, looked at them suspiciously. She didn't sense the chakra of a ninja from either of them. After a moment of assessing the situation, Tsunade called out from the shelter, "Come inside and talk." As Kain and Yahiko made their way into the ruins, they noticed a figure stepping out from the shadows, Orochimaru. The trio had now officially encountered the legendary Sunin. Chapter 7. Orochimaru emerged from the shadows, signaling that there was no immediate intention to attack. Perhaps they had determined that Kain wasn't a threat since he wasn't a ninja. The mere fact that they were willing to talk suggested that the first step was a success. Kain let out a small sigh of relief and walked forward with Yahiko, though they maintained some distance even after entering the sheltered area. This cautious behavior was entirely natural in Orochimaru's view, especially as he, too, remained wary of Kain. Jiraiya, ever curious, quickly posed a question. "What's your purpose?" Kain, maintaining his calm demeanor, replied, "I'm a businessman who lost his way in the Land of Rain. I happened to meet these children and learned about the skirmish between Konoha shinobi and Rain shinobi from them. I asked them to bring me here to meet you." Jiraiya looked at him skeptically. "A businessman? Near a battlefield?" "I got lost," Kain explained again, his voice even. "Honestly, this is my first time in the Land of Rain, and I didn't know there was a war nearby. The goods I carry have great value for shinobi, so I'd like to propose a trade. I can show you samples from my backpack, but I'll need a promise from the three of you not to suddenly attack me." Kain's hand moved into his backpack, though it wasn't for the physical samples inside. Instead, using his backpack as a cover, he retrieved supplies from his space backpack, out of view of the others. I have 2 categories of items for trade, medicine and food, Kain began. The medicines include anti-inflammatory drugs, antibiotics, antipyretics, vitamins, and various medical supplies. As for food, I carry staples like rice, flour, oil, sugar, and salt but in large quantities. As Kain held up the medicine boxes, which bore labels written in Japanese, he made a note of the unfamiliar packaging. Even though the shinobi might not recognize the description, the value of the contents was unmistakable. Tsunade's attention piqued as she leaned in to examine the medicine. Being one of Konoha's most skilled medical ninjas, Tsunade was familiar with the stark limitations of Konoha's current medical resources. The village's medical systems had yet to develop fully, with most remedies still made from basic herbs. Capsules, pills, or anything resembling modern pharmaceutical products were practically unheard of. What do these medicines do? She asked, carefully inspecting the boxes. Kain explained, there are instructions on each of the boxes. The effects are just as the labels describe. These are samples, so you are welcome to test them on your wounded shinobi to verify. Jiraiya and Orochimaru remained quiet as they observed Tsunade's reaction. Her focus deepened as she read the descriptions, and when she reached the final box, her expression grew serious. Are the effects really as described? Tsunade asked, her tone demanding clarity. Of course, Kain replied confidently. These are not for show. I am a businessman. You can test them on the injured. I wouldn't mislead you. Deception is bad for business. It was clear that the medicine intrigued Tsunade. As the 3 shinobi from Konoha considered the possibilities, Kain pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to Tsunade. This is the list of available items and their quantities. Beyond that, there's nothing more to discuss for now. Jiraiya, still observing Kain closely, asked, are you from the land of lightning? No, Kain responded flatly. I'm not affiliated with any of the known nations. I come from America, across the sea, though I doubt you've heard of it. Tsunade glanced up from the list and said, if these medicines work as you say, I'll buy the entire first batch on behalf of Konoha. Konoha was wealthy enough to afford the purchase, and the scarcity of medical supplies during the war had proven disastrous for their wounded. If the medicines Kain offered could save lives, they would be invaluable, even potentially replacing the need for lower-level medical ninjas. One more thing, Tsunade added. It would be best if you came back with us to Konoha's camp. I don't mind, Kain agreed, but you must ensure my safety. I am not a shinobi, but I do have ways to escape. If I sense any danger or mistreatment, I will cancel the deal immediately, and you will never get your hands on my goods again. Tsunade gave a firm nod. I guarantee your safety in the name of Konoha's Jonin, Tsunade. With that assurance, Kain confirmed, so, the deal is set. Tsunade responded decisively, yes, let's trade. As soon as the agreement was sealed, the trading system Kain relied on indicated that the world trading coordinates were successfully bound. The name Tsunade appeared as the bound recipient. Tsunade then turned to Jiraiya and Orochimaru. We need to head back as quickly as possible. Jiraiya glanced at Yahiko, who had stood silently beside Kain. And what about this kid? Kain quickly stepped aside, putting some distance between himself and Yahiko. He's not with me. We were simply traveling in the same direction. With Kain disassociating himself from the young boy, all eyes fell on Yahiko. Under their collective gaze, Yahiko hesitated for a moment, but remembering Kain's earlier words and fueled by the burning dream inside him, he summoned his courage. I want to learn ninjutsu. Yahiko shouted, his voice trembling but filled with determination. I want to change this crying country and make it a better place. Tsunade and Orochimaru exchanged silent looks. They were unimpressed by what they saw as a child's naive dream. To them, Yahiko's ideals seemed ill-suited to the harsh realities of the shinobi world. Orochimaru dismissed him. We don't have time for this, Jiraiya. We still have tasks to complete back at camp. Tsunade nodded in agreement. Yes, we need to return immediately. But Jiraiya, whose expression had grown more serious, couldn't help but be swayed by the boy's words. He looked into Yahiko's eyes and saw something more than just a childish wish. He saw resolve. Jiraiya, ever mindful of the prophecy of the great toad sage about the child of prophecy, felt the tug of fate. I think I'll stay, Jiraiya announced, surprising both Tsunade and Orochimaru. The war is almost over, and I can take care of these kids. Just then, Konan and Nagato emerged from behind a stone pillar, making their presence known to the three legendary shinobi. Both Tsunade and Orochimaru's expressions shifted to disbelief. Jiraiya! Tsunade shouted, her voice full of frustration. Do you even understand what you're saying? Chapter 8. The war between Konoha and the Land of Rain had ended just over a day ago. Konoha's legendary son and Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru had recently engaged in a fierce battle with Hanzo the Salamander, leader of Omegakure. In the aftermath, while Orochimaru and Tsunade prepared to return to Konoha, Jiraiya made a surprising decision. He chose to stay behind in the war-torn Land of Rain to care for a group of orphans he had just met. This guy Jiraiya chose to stay in the Land of Rain. Can't he see what the situation is now? Tsunade complained as they made their way back to the Konoha camp. We've just fought Hanzo, the war is barely over, and he's going to stay behind to care for a few kids? What if Rain Shinobi sees this as provocation? We could reignite the war, and then what? What if Konoha sees this as desertion? He could be labeled a traitor. Orochimaru, walking beside her, remained indifferent. Don't look to me for help. I'll speak on his behalf to Sarutobi-sensei when we get back, but that's it. If he wants to throw his future away for a few orphans, let him. He shrugged, showing little concern for Jiraiya's decision. To Orochimaru, Jiraiya's actions were an unnecessary risk, and he had no intention of defending his comrade's decision beyond a few words. Tsunade sighed, realizing she wouldn't get much sympathy from Orochimaru. Fine. Let him explain himself to Sarutobi-sensei when he returns. As they continued their journey, Tsunade slowed her pace to walk alongside Kain Pent, the merchant they had encountered. She had been intrigued by the medicines Kain had shown them, wondering about their effectiveness. These medicines seemed years ahead of anything Konoha could produce, particularly for battlefield injuries. Kain, a non-shinobi, had been cautious throughout their interactions, keen to avoid suspicion or conflict. Despite his wariness, he had willingly shared knowledge with Tsunade, explaining how his medicines could be used for emergency treatment, even by non-medical ninjas. Kain also provided detailed information about basic battlefield first aid techniques that could be employed by ordinary ninjas. His explanations impressed Tsunade, who saw great potential in applying such knowledge across Konoha's forces. The deeper they delved into the discussion, the more Tsunade's respect for Kain grew. Though he was not a medical ninja, his understanding of battlefield medicine and first aid techniques was advanced. This knowledge could save countless lives, especially when combined with the medicine he offered for trade. You've got some impressive knowledge, Tsunade praised, her tone lightening. Your name is a bit strange, but I have to admit, your medical skills are nothing to scoff at. Kain chuckled softly, it's just a deeper understanding of this specific field. After all, I do need to know how to sell these medicines. As they approached the Konoha camp, Tsunade reflected on Kain's knowledge and the potential it had to revolutionize how they approached battlefield care. The idea of training more ninjas in first aid, coupled with Kain's supplies, could be a game changer. It was much more feasible than training more medical ninjas, a process that required rare talent and extensive time. Kain's knowledge, in contrast, was simple but effective. When they finally arrived at the camp, the guards at the entrance scrutinized the trio as a matter of routine. Kain, although under Tsunade and Orochimaru's protection, was still subject to inspection due to the ongoing war. After the security check, they allowed him to pass, though with some wariness. Tsunade led Kain to a tent, explaining, "This is where I rest. You can stay here for now while I take care of the arrangements. Don't worry, no one will trouble you here." Before leaving, she ensured a Hyuga clan ninja was stationed outside the tent to keep an eye on Kain. This served both to protect Kain from curious or aggressive shinobi and to ensure he didn't stray into areas he shouldn't. As cautious as Kain had been throughout the journey, Tsunade knew he was no threat. Despite his insistence that he would leave if he sensed danger, Kain had been thoroughly checked. The sensors in Hyuga guards had confirmed that he had no chakra or signs of any ninja training. His claims of being an ordinary person seemed legitimate. Tsunade headed to the conference tent where the war council was held. She was the last to arrive, greeted immediately by Konoha's war commander in the Land of Rain, Shimura Dance. His sharp tone caught her off guard. "Tsunade, why didn't Jiraiya come back with you? And who is this person you brought back? We're still at war, and you brought a stranger into the camp." Tsunade didn't flinch at Dan's words. She had long grown tired of his abrasive nature. "I've already reported Jiraiya's decision to teacher Sarutobi. As for the person I brought back, we'll discuss that in due time. Dan's annoyance was evident, but he was powerless to act against Tsunade directly. Not only was she one of Konoha's greatest assets in battle, but her ties to the Senju clan and her recent battlefield success gave her a level of protection that even Dan's had to respect. Additionally, her grandmother, Lady Mito, was still alive, making any direct confrontation unwise. Humph, fine, Dan's grunted, shifting the topic. Let's focus on the war effort. The meeting shifted to updates on the battlefield. The Rain Village forces had retreated, exhausted and unable to continue fighting due to their strained logistics. Only Sand Shinobi remained a significant threat, but Konoha was pushing them back. Once the general discussion of the war ended, Dan's turned his attention back to Tsunade, along with the rest of the gathered commanders. They were all curious about the medicines and supplies she had brought back. Tsunade wasted no time. She retrieved the samples Kain had given her and laid them out on the table. His name is Kain Pent. He's a merchant from a distant land, lost in the land of rain. These are the medicines he's selling. Everyone in the tent examined the products closely. As they read the labels and descriptions, the atmosphere grew more serious. The potential of these medicines to revolutionize battlefield treatment was clear to all. Even Dan's, who had been skeptical, seemed intrigued. In the end, Tsunade's decision to bring Kain to the camp was vindicated. His medicines could save countless lives, and the knowledge he offered would help strengthen Konoha's forces. As discussions continued, it became clear that Kain's contribution would play a vital role in the future of the ongoing war. Chapter 9. Are these medical supplies and medicine? The ninja in the camp, especially those with experience on the battlefield, easily recognized bandages, wound medicine patches, and similar basic supplies. However, some of the capsules, granular medicines, and even sprays were not immediately identifiable. Fortunately, there were instructions labeled on the packaging, so the ninjas began inspecting the items more closely. These were not ordinary supplies, they could change the course of how medical treatment was administered during the war. As the ninjas rummaged through the supplies, Tsunade, who had been keenly observing them, began explaining to the group. These are emergency medicines designed specifically for the battlefield. They have various functions such as stopping bleeding, reducing inflammation, and treating fever. With these medicines, we can significantly reduce the current shortage of medical ninjas. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in. Combined with basic first aid techniques and simple suturing methods, we can reduce the casualty rate on the battlefield by several times. A Jainin from the Nara clan raised an eyebrow. Is this medicine really as effective as it's described to be? Tsunade replied calmly, I'm not certain yet. These are just samples for us to try. But if the results align with the descriptions, I would strongly recommend we purchase these in bulk. Otherwise, with the current state of our medical corps, we simply won't have enough manpower to treat all the wounded in the camp. Her tone grew more somber, and though she didn't finish her sentence, everyone in the tent knew the grim reality of what she was implying. The medical team had been stretched thin, with some ninjas succumbing to their injuries simply because there weren't enough resources to treat them in time. The weight of her words was heavy on the minds of those present, especially after witnessing firsthand the overwhelming number of casualties and the immense toll the war had taken on their medical staff. Among the wounded were countless members of prominent ninja clans, and the thought of being unable to save their comrades was too much to bear. Shimura Dan's, ever the skeptic, spoke up, his voice low and serious. And what about the man who provided these? What do we know of his origins? Tsunade shrugged slightly. He claims to come from across the sea from a place called the United States, but who knows what really exists on the other side of the world? One thing I can confidently say is that these medicines didn't come from another ninja village. If they had, Konoha would have heard something about them by now. She leaned back and crossed her arms. That said, he's a strange one. He has no chakra and doesn't appear to be trained in ninjutsu. He doesn't seem to be affiliated with any other village and certainly doesn't have the look of a spy. He's just a businessman, or so he claims. Dan's wasn't convinced. A businessman? And yet he conveniently appears near the battlefield, offering us supplies? What if he's more than he seems? Yamanaka Jainin. He was about to issue a command to probe deeper when Orochimaru intervened with a sly grin. Assistant Dan's, there's no need to be so hasty. If you scare him off or eliminate him prematurely, we might miss out on what could be a beneficial arrangement for Konoha. Let's face it, the man poses little threat by himself. His supplies, on the other hand, could turn the tide in this war. If we don't take advantage, it might be Rain Shinobi who benefit from this discovery instead. The room fell silent as Orochimaru's words sank in. The other Jainin present began to murmur among themselves, their skepticism starting to wane. There was wisdom in Orochimaru's assessment. If these medicines were as valuable as they seemed, and if Rain Shinobi were to get their hands on them, Konoha's current advantage could be lost. Dan's face darkened as he considered the possibility of Rain Shinobi benefiting from their negligence. Fine, he muttered after a long pause. Tsunade, verify the effectiveness of these supplies. If they prove to be legitimate, send a report to Lord Sarutobi and the other elders. Large-scale procurement will require their authorization, and we must ensure everything is above board. Tsunade nodded. Understood. I'll also gather a list of all the supplies he provided, including food, and prepare a report on them as well. With that, the meeting came to an end, and the group dispersed. As Tsunade stepped out of the tent, she couldn't help but smirk slightly. Seeing Dan's frustrated always gave her a strange sense of satisfaction. That, and the thought of making a real difference with these new medicines, lightened her mood significantly. Orochimaru, she called out as she caught up with him. What's next for you? He glanced at her, his golden eyes thoughtful. If things go as planned, I'll be sent to deal with Sand Shinobi next. Tsunade nodded. Thinking of her younger brother, she hesitated for a moment before asking, Orochimaru, when we get back, would you consider taking on Noeki as your disciple? He's been dying to train under you. Orochimaru smirked. If he can pass my evaluation, perhaps. At the very least, he has already proven his discernment by not choosing Jiraiya as a mentor. With that, the matter was settled. Tsunade returned to her tent, where Kain was waiting patiently. The meeting went well. If the medicines check out, Konoha will make a large-scale purchase. I hope you don't mind waiting for a while longer. Of course, Kain replied with a calm smile. Inspections are a necessary part of any transaction. Internally, however, Kain was already calculating his next moves. The deal with Konoha had progressed smoothly so far, and soon, he would have an established presence in this world. From there, he could expand his operations, perhaps even setting up trading posts in other countries. The potential profits from selling materials between the two worlds were astronomical, especially if he could maintain a monopoly on these medicines. He had bigger plans too. If he could learn more about the advanced medical techniques in this world, particularly the unique blend of chakra-based healing, he could revolutionize medicine back in his own world. It wasn't beyond reason to think that with the help of skilled medical nin, he could cure previously incurable diseases or even extend lifespans. Back at the medical camp, the harsh reality of the war was all too evident. Hundreds of wounded shinobi lay in rows, and the few medical nin available were struggling to keep up. As Kain observed the state of affairs, he couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and sadness for the ninja around him. These were warriors trained to fight, but here they were, some barely clinging to life due to a lack of medical resources. After assisting with suturing the wounds of 3 shinobi and applying some of his own medicine, Kain walked out of the tent, frowning slightly. He washed the blood from his hands and took a deep breath, calming himself. When Tsunade approached him, he spoke quietly, the medicine's effectiveness is just about confirmed, Tsunade. But I need to reiterate, I'm just a businessman, not a doctor. Chapter 10. Of course, you've worked hard these past 2 days, ahaha. Tsunade laughed awkwardly, trying to lighten the mood. However, Kain's expression didn't change, so she continued, well, it has been confirmed in the past 2 days that your medicine is indeed as effective as described. I've already sent a message to Konoha, and will definitely purchase it in large quantities soon. Kain let out a small sigh of relief and replied, that's good. To be honest, I've been away for quite a while. It would be great if we could finalize the transaction quickly. Tsunade smiled, trying to reassure him, don't worry. If there are no complications, a group will be returning to Konoha in 3 days. I'll be going back with them, and we can conclude the negotiations then. Kain glanced at her, hesitating for a moment, before he asked, I was just curious. Given your strength, do you really need to go back right now just to oversee a transaction? If it's not convenient to answer, you can just ignore the question. Tsunade shrugged, seemingly unconcerned. There's no issue in answering. The war is almost over, so I'm going back with the wounded. Sand Shinobi is retreating, and they've lost the will to continue fighting. Under the combined pressure from Konoha and Rain Shinobi, Sand Shinobi's casualties have far surpassed ours, all thanks to Danzo's strategy. If the fighting continued, Konoha would suffer heavy losses, but Sand Shinobi would collapse. That's why they've conceded. She paused before continuing, my role here is no longer as critical. At this point, the best thing I can do is to return to the village and contribute at Konoha Hospital. Kain nodded, accepting her reasoning. He didn't know if time flowed differently between his world and the ninja world, but he had already been in the ninja world for 5 days. He estimated that he could only afford to stay for about 20 more days before his absence in his own world might raise alarms, possibly leading to police involvement and missing person reports. Several days later, Tsunade led a group of wounded back to Konoha, with Kain among them. Since he wasn't a ninja, Tsunade made arrangements for him to travel in a carriage. She understood that Kain would soon be a distinguished guest in Konoha and should be treated accordingly. The journey took some time, and by the time they arrived in Konoha, it was already late afternoon. As they entered the village, Tsunade looked back at Kain with a hint of pride. Here we are, this is Konoha. How do you like it? Kain looked around, unimpressed. It's not bad. So, what's next? Tsunade clicked her tongue, seemingly annoyed by his lack of enthusiasm, but she continued, first, I'll find you a place to stay. There are still plenty of vacant houses available. Your house. Kain's expression stiffened, and he quickly interjected, that's not necessary. Any hotel will do. I'm here for business, not to overstay my welcome in someone else's home. Living in Tsunade's home, in the heart of the Senju clan's territory, was the last thing Kain wanted. He had no desire to entangle himself further in the affairs of Konoha's elite. Tsunade waved off his concerns. There aren't any hotels in Konoha, and the only other options are unassigned houses or ninja apartments. Neither of those is suitable for you. My house has plenty of space, and it's in the Senju compound, so you'll be well protected. Kain was momentarily taken aback. Konoha, a village without a single hotel? What had she been so proud of earlier? Konoha had only existed for a little over 30 years, and it was still primarily a military village. Civilian businesses were a recent development, and inns simply didn't exist. Tsunade's suggestion to have Kain stay in her home was more than just hospitality. In truth, she had already informed Third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, about Kain's arrival, and he had given his approval. The real reason was more strategic. Tsunade's grandmother, Uzumaki Mito, had the unique ability to sense the malice in people's hearts. By having Kain stay in the Senju compound, Mito could easily monitor him without his knowledge. Mito's perceptive abilities had recently uncovered several spies within Konoha, and there was no doubt that if Kain harbored any hidden animosity toward the village, it would be detected. Given the importance of the medicine Kain had brought, Sarutobi Hiruzen was not taking any chances. The medicine could shift the balance of power in the ongoing war, and if Kain were an agent of another village, particularly range shinobi, it could spell disaster for Konoha. Kain studied Tsunade for a moment, realizing that this was not a matter for debate. He sighed, fine. I suppose I'll accept your hospitality, Tsunade-san. Despite his initial discomfort, Kain knew that continuing to press the issue would be pointless. Under Tsunade's guidance, he was led to the Senju clan's compound. The wars had decimated the once powerful Senju clan, and the clan lands now felt vast and empty. Once Kain was settled into one of the vacant houses, Tsunade gave him a final set of instructions. You can rest here for the day. Tomorrow, I'll take you to meet Sarutobi-sensei, the third Hokage. Got it, Kain replied. I'll stay here unless something urgent comes up. You don't have to be that cautious. If you want to go out and explore, just let me know, Tsunade remarked, feeling a bit exasperated by Kain's overly cautious behavior. He seemed to have no interest in spying on Konoha or meddling in their affairs. Meanwhile, in another part of the Senju compound, third Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen stood next to Uzumaki Mito, holding a crystal ball. With great respect, he asked, Mito-sama, would you kindly use your ability to sense good and evil? We need to know if this man harbors any malice toward Konoha. Uzumaki Mito closed her eyes and focused on Kain's presence. After a few moments, she opened her eyes and said calmly, he bears no malice. Sarutobi Hiruzen nodded, visibly relieved. Thank you, Mito-sama. I'll make the necessary arrangements for tomorrow's negotiations. With that, Sarutobi left Mito's side, preparing for the important business dealings that lay ahead. The medicine Kain had brought to Konoha could change the course of the war, and ensuring a smooth transaction was now his top priority. Chapter 11. After breakfast in the morning, Kain was taken to the Hokage building by Tsunade to finalize the transaction as soon as possible. Tsunade explained that there were new patients arriving at Konoha Hospital daily, and the demand for medicine had surged. Without Kain's supplies, Hokage would have no choice but to request medicinal support from various ninja clans. Although Konoha Hospital lacked the deep resources of some larger clans, Tsunade's medical ninja training reform was gradually strengthening its capabilities. As Kain listened to Tsunade, he began to understand more about Konoha's situation. However, he also felt that Tsunade was being a bit too open with an outsider like himself. Shouldn't this kind of information be kept confidential? When they arrived at the Hokage building, Kain was introduced to the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, a man in his prime, with an aura of authority that immediately impressed Kain. Sarutobi Hiruzen was only in his 30s at this time, a seasoned ninja with an extensive reputation for both starting wars and suppressing other powerful shinobi, such as the Rain Shinobi Village and the Sand Shinobi Village. His moniker, the Professor, was certainly fitting. Kain greeted him respectfully. "Third Hokage, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Kain Pent. Are there any questions or concerns about the medicine deal?" Sarutobi Hiruzen, already having reviewed the terms of the transaction the previous day, seemed thoughtful. The prices, though fair, were still a bit high for Konoha's war-torn economy. However, before he could respond, an elderly woman sitting beside him, Yuditen Koharu, a member of Konoha's advisory council, interjected. "The prices are far too expensive," Koharu stated firmly. "We think a 40% reduction would be more reasonable." The bluntness of her remark took Kain by surprise, though he remained composed. He couldn't help but internally curse the abruptness of her demand. Tsunade, too, looked momentarily taken aback but quickly masked her reaction. "Third Hokage," Kain said, tilting his head with a thin smile, "may I ask who this is?" He knew very well that no one would dare interrupt the Hokage without permission, but he wanted clarification. Sarutobi Hiruzen introduced her. "This is Elder Yuditen Koharu, responsible for Konoha's logistics and the hospital's management." Kain acknowledged her with a nod but made his stance clear. "It seems we cannot agree on the price of the medicine. If that's the case, should we discuss other trade items? Or will there be no further negotiation?" Tsunade and Sarutobi Hiruzen were visibly shocked. It wasn't common for someone to walk away so decisively from a deal, especially in the middle of a war when supplies were desperately needed. But Kain wasn't someone who could be pressured. He knew that his goods, especially in a time of war, were in high demand. Sarutobi Hiruzen coughed to regain control of the conversation. "Mr. Kain, is there really no room for negotiation on the price of the medicine?" Kain smiled again, unfazed. "I'm afraid not, Third Hokage. I don't have the authority to change the price." Koharu wasn't pleased with this. Konoha is taking a significant risk by purchasing a large volume of medicine from an unknown source. Kain remained calm, but his tone grew firmer. "In that case, I apologize for not considering the situation more carefully. If there are no other matters to discuss, I will prepare to leave." Kain's confidence came from the fact that the demand for food and medicine during the ongoing Second Shinobi World War made his goods indispensable. Whether it was Rock Shinobi Village, Sand Shinobi Village, or even Konoha's other enemies, someone would be eager to buy what he had to offer. Kain wasn't interested in playing games with Konoha's leadership. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Sarutobi Hiruzen quickly reassured him. "Please, wait a moment, Mr. Kain." He sent Tsunade to escort Kain out of the room while they discussed the matter internally. Back inside the office, Sarutobi Hiruzen and the council members deliberated. They couldn't afford to lose this deal, as Konoha's wounded required immediate medical care, and without these medicines, the situation could grow dire. Finally, they reached a consensus and called Kain back. "Mr. Kain," Sarutobi Hiruzen began, "we've reconsidered. We agree to purchase the medicine at the original prices, but we need your assurance that you won't sell these medicines to other ninja villages." Kain pondered for a moment before responding. "I can agree that large quantities of the medicine will only be sold to Konoha. However, I cannot prevent civilians from purchasing smaller quantities. Additionally, I would like permission to open a medicine shop and a grain store here in Konoha." The terms seemed reasonable to Sarutobi Hiruzen. If Kain set up shop in Konoha, it would actually make it easier for Enbu to monitor him. Furthermore, it would stabilize the supply of both medicines and food in the village. With the deal settled, Kain provided the first batch of medicines, which were worth around 100 million ryo. Kain had cleverly structured the deal so that only a portion of the payment would be in cash, with the remainder being covered by Konoha's gold reserves and real estate properties. The total gold he acquired was over 50 kilograms, enough to comfortably offset his costs. As for the real estate, Kain knew that the land he was being given wasn't of the highest value, but it was still a valuable investment. Kain's decision to open a shop in Konoha meant he could continue profiting from the war-torn economy, and with his access pass granted by the Hokage, he was now free to move about Konoha and conduct further business. For Sarutobi Hiruzen, the success of this transaction meant that Konoha's wounded would receive the treatment they needed, at least for the foreseeable future. The negotiations, though tense, had ended successfully. Kain left the Hokage building with the knowledge that his position in Konoha was now secure, and the wealth he had amassed would only grow as the war dragged on. He would return soon with the medicines, ready to take advantage of the ongoing conflict and cement his role as a key supplier to one of the most powerful ninja villages in the world. Chapter 12. Didn't notice anyone else? Sarutobi Hiruzen asked again, his expression solemn as he confirmed the situation with Enbu. Despite repeated questioning, the response remained the same. Yes, Lord Hokage, Enbu replied while half kneeling in front of him. We checked all individuals entering and exiting Kain's rented warehouse in town. We still haven't identified who delivered the medical supplies. Enbu's tracking mission had, by all accounts, failed, and they had come up empty-handed. Sarutobi Hiruzen's brow furrowed in thought, murmuring, he managed to hide it from you three? Whoever it is must be incredibly skilled. Which ninja could it be? Who would go to such lengths to help him in Konoha? In less than a day, hundreds of boxes of medical supplies had arrived in town. Although they might have been prepared beforehand, Enbu had already thoroughly inspected the warehouse that Kain had rented. The fact that they found nothing was troubling. Mitokado Homura spoke next, his voice thoughtful. If a ninja from another power is behind this, it's hard to believe they'd go through all this effort just to help Konoha. Koharu has already instructed Konoha Hospital to meticulously check all the medicines. There's little chance they'll find any foul play. Yudin Koharu added, these medicines are unlike anything we've seen in the ninja world before. Hiruzen, should we continue sending Enbu to other nations to gather intelligence on this mysterious supplier? Sarutobi Hiruzen took a slow drag from his pipe before responding. For now, let's proceed cautiously. We're still in the middle of the war. As long as the medicines are legitimate, Konoha stands to gain. The deal was relatively small in terms of cost, 30 million ryo, some houses in Konoha, and a portion of the gold seized from the battlefield. The gold came from rich veins in the Land of Wind, often looted during skirmishes with the Sand Shinobi village. Konoha regularly raided Sand Shinobi village's logistics and domestic caravans, collecting gold and other ores. Just then, an Enbu member entered the Hokage's office and immediately reported, Lord Hokage, there's news from Konoha Hospital. Lady Tsunade has inspected half of the medicine, and all of it is qualified for use. The wounded have already begun receiving treatment. The remaining half should be fully tested by noon tomorrow. Sarutobi Hiruzen nodded, finally allowing himself a small smile. Inform Tsunade to send some of the medicine and supplies to the medical ninjas heading to the Land of Grass battlefield. The pressure on the front lines is intense. Yes, Lord Hokage, the Enbu responded before disappearing from the room. With the influx of medical supplies, Konoha Hospital was able to ease some of the burden it had been under. Tsunade had also employed numerous careful Konoha women, training them in bandaging, suturing, and other supportive roles alongside the medical ninjas. This greatly reduced the workload on the medical ninjas, improving overall efficiency. Meanwhile, Kain was unaware of the hospital's progress. His focus was on a different goal, opening 2 stores in Konoha. After surveying the area, he realized that the location of his stores wasn't too remote. With the right investments, he could even develop the area into a bustling street of business and entertainment. However, he needed to recruit staff to help manage his enterprises. Kain knew he couldn't personally oversee the day-to-day operations of the stores, especially considering the scale of his activities in both worlds. Unsure of how to proceed, he decided to seek advice from Tsunade. That afternoon, Kain went to Konoha Hospital, hoping to catch Tsunade when she finished her work. After asking around, he learned that she was still busy, so he waited patiently at the hospital entrance. As dusk settled, Tsunade finally emerged. Kain? What are you doing here? Tsunade asked as she approached. I have something I'd like to consult with you about specifically, recruiting staff. Before Kain could continue, Tsunade interrupted him. Let's talk about it over dinner. I'm starving and haven't had a chance to eat yet. Kain followed Tsunade to a local izakaya, where they sat down for a meal. Once Tsunade placed her order, Kain explained his situation. I need to recruit some staff to help run my stores. It's nothing too complicated, but they need to be trustworthy and detail-oriented. I'll start with 5 people for now, but I'll need more as the business grows. Of course, they'll be fairly compensated. Tsunade thought for a moment. That sounds simple enough. I can help you find some people by tomorrow. By the way, thank you for sharing your first aid methods for the battlefield. They've been invaluable. Kain nodded, appreciating her gratitude. I'm glad to hear it. As Tsunade sipped her drink, a thought crossed her mind. Many families in the Senju clan had lost their primary breadwinners due to the war. Although Konoha provided pensions, they were hardly enough to support these families long-term. The Senju clan had been supporting these widowed families, but even the clan's savings were not endless. With Kain's offer in mind, Tsunade realized this could be a perfect opportunity for those families. I have a suggestion, she said. I'd like to recommend some people from my clan. Most of them are widows whose husbands died in battle. They could really use the work, and they're reliable. Kain considered her offer and then nodded in agreement. That sounds good. Let's go with them. I'll meet them tomorrow. Thank you for the help, Tsunade. After settling the bill, Kain stood up to leave. I have other matters to attend to, so I'll head out now. Tsunade watched him go and then muttered to herself, that guy, always leaving as soon as business is done. The following morning, the women Tsunade had recommended arrived at Kain's store. There were 5 of them, all from families that had suffered greatly in the ninja wars. Although they no longer carried the Senju surname, they remained a resilient and active group, even after losing many of their men to the battlefield. Kain took the time to ask each of them their names before appointing the most stable-looking woman as the store manager. The others were assigned roles as clerks, cashiers, and cleaners. He then spent a little time explaining how the store would operate. For now, it would primarily sell non-staple food items, but as business grew, they would expand to other snacks and goods. Kain had meticulously planned the entire operation and knew exactly how much profit he could generate by purchasing and reselling items. Once everything was in place, Kain left the village to prepare the next shipment of food for his stores. With his new staff in position, he was ready to begin the next phase of his business venture, all while keeping a close eye on the ongoing war and its opportunities. Chapter 13. Come back smoothly. Upon his return, Kain took a moment to assess his surroundings. He was indeed back in his living room. Glancing at the clock, a look of surprise flashed across his face as he exclaimed, "It's only been 2 days? The time ratio is 5 to 1. Kain quickly opened the panel of the trading system, reading through its descriptions. He began to understand the situation more clearly. The time difference between the 2 worlds was initially set this way upon the establishment of the world trading goal. However, with the frequent deepening of transactions, the time ratio between the 2 worlds would gradually shift back to normal, and this time differential was bidirectional. It'll sort itself out eventually, Kain muttered to himself. For now, it is what it is. The trading system operated by its own rules, and Kain couldn't change that. He could only use this cheat to make himself stronger as quickly as possible. Although his first transaction didn't yield much in terms of personal wealth, Kain's greatest gain from his venture into the ninja world was more than 50 kilograms of gold. He also managed to save his few life-saving firearms, although they would be more useful for building his power later on. Kain had ambitious plans for the future. Once his influence in the ninja world grew, he could establish contact with Orochimaru. He knew that the main reason Orochimaru cooperated with Danzo was because of the resources provided by the route, namely, money, materials, and Hashirama cells. While Kain couldn't provide the last one, he could certainly offer the first 2. Additionally, Kain believed that some of the biological research from the Marvel world would be highly appealing to Orochimaru. I need to establish a trading company to cover up my activities, a biotechnology company, and a channel to sell gold, Kain thought aloud. Selling gold in small quantities, tens of kilograms at a time, could be managed through contacts. However, if he continued trading in larger amounts, Kain knew he would eventually attract unwanted attention. He made a mental note to take action before that happened. It's only been 2 days, and nothing significant has happened. Before heading back to the ninja world, I need to register these companies and hire a lawyer, he reminded himself. After checking his mailbox and finding nothing of concern, Kain's thoughts shifted back to the ninja world. He realized the scarcity of supplies during wartime, particularly food and medicine, which were essentially hard currency at this point. The vegetable market in Konoha village had been completely empty due to the shortage of supplies, making it a prime opportunity for him to capitalize on. Kain made 2 quick phone calls, ordering another batch of supplies. Then, he called Carl's father, Connor, and planned a visit to his house that evening. Carl, Kain's friend, couldn't help much when it came to finding a lawyer or registering a company, but Connor, a well-connected gold broker often seen on Wall Street, could. That evening, Connor knew that Kain had something important to discuss, so he turned down other appointments and prepared a dinner, albeit not a particularly delicious one, but something he had made himself. He served steamed sea bass with a dipping sauce, a dish he'd come across somewhere and decided to try. Despite Carl once deceiving Connor into thinking his cooking skills were great in exchange for pocket money, Connor had come to genuinely believe it over time. So, when Kain arrived, Connor had prepared 3 sea bass, each with its own dish of sauce. Upon Kain's arrival, Connor led him straight to the dining table. "Kain, try my cooking. The sea bass is fresh today. If I can get my hands on such fresh fish again, I might even try eating it raw with mustard." Thanks, Uncle Connor," Kain replied awkwardly. He cut a small piece of the fish, swallowed it quickly, and washed it down with juice before moving directly to the topic at hand. "Uncle Connor, I want to start 2 companies, and I was hoping you could help me find someone in this line of work. I'm also looking to recruit managers. Do you know where I should go?" Before Connor could respond, Carl enthusiastically chimed in, waving his knife and fork. "That's awesome, brother. I always thought lightning wasn't as good as Wall Street lightning. You're finally—" "Wait a minute, Carl. This has nothing to do with lightning," Kain interrupted quickly, referring to Carl's exaggerated financial nickname. "We'll talk about that later. For now, I want to focus on registering a trading and biotechnology company." Connor thought for a moment, then nodded. "Registering a company? I know someone who specializes in that field. Let me grab their business card for you," he said, getting up to search for it. As he rummaged around, he asked, "Are you sure you want to register a company in trade and biotechnology, and not a securities firm?" "I'll likely get into that at some point too, but these 2 are more important for me right now, Uncle Connor," Kain affirmed. Connor, seeing Kain's confidence, knew that his son's friend had made up his mind. For years, he had admired Kain's assertiveness and quick learning. Kain had been making smart financial decisions long before his peers, and a year ago, Connor had stopped viewing him as a mere teenager and started treating him as an equal. Kain had even gotten Carl involved in a profitable venture recently, and Connor had analyzed the situation himself, concluding that there was indeed a lot of money to be made. In fact, he had mobilized a considerable sum to capitalize on the opportunity. After dinner, Kain obtained the contact information for the business specialist from Connor, who promised to reach out to the person before Kain made contact. The next day, Kain visited the address on the business card and was warmly welcomed by the company Connor had recommended. He explained his needs, and registering the company turned out to be a trivial matter for them. If left to their capable hands, they could complete the process within 3 days. Additionally, they offered to help rent office space, which would only take 2 extra days. Wanting to save time, Kain decided to delegate the entire process to the company. Although it would take a few more days, it spared him the trouble of handling the details himself. The trading company was essential to Kain's plans, not for making money, but for its ability to move large quantities of goods without drawing attention. However, building the infrastructure from scratch would take time. Kain needed to hire more people to execute his vision. At this stage, his priority was to find obedient and efficient staff who could carry out his instructions flawlessly. As the company grew, Kain would eventually need a manager who could oversee the big picture, someone akin to Pepper Potts at Stark Industries, an executor who could manage the operations' complexities and lead it to success. Chapter 14. Kain had not sold gold for a while, but there was no rush. His savings were still plentiful, and he knew it wasn't the right time yet. Gaining wholesale agent qualifications for medicines and food was a complex process, but Kain had professional companies running errands for him. Besides, in the year 2000, many parts of the world were facing shortages of medicines, and the wholesale pharmaceutical industry in the United States was still in its infancy. Kain aimed his trading ambitions beyond the US to regions in need of supplies, such as Mexico and parts of West Asia. Word of Kain's plans to open a pharmaceutical and food trading wholesale company had slowly spread, though the news no longer elicited much surprise. Most people were mildly interested, but they quickly lost focus, assuming it was just another business endeavor. After all, Kain had inherited shares in a large-scale private hospital built by the Pent family, but he showed no interest in managing hospitals. As usual, that part of the business remained tied to his family name, and he had other ventures in mind. Spending money is like running water, Kain mused as he calculated the expenses he'd accrued over the past few days. While the company was successfully established and the qualifications for drug wholesale and trade had been processed smoothly, keeping up with these ventures wasn't cheap. Kain had even hired several people with expertise in pharmaceutical wholesale and cross-border trade. His accountants and lawyers were also ready, ensuring that the company would be able to operate efficiently once all legal procedures were complete. Though Kain's company was primarily a facade to deceive those around him during the early stages, it would eventually become irrelevant. His real focus was on his future biopharmaceutical company. This first business venture was merely a stepping stone to something far greater. What Kain really hoped for was that the medical ninjutsu he'd encountered in the ninja world would provide a breakthrough in drug development. The potential was immense. Ninja world wars often led to innovative developments, like the poisons created by Sand Village puppeteers. These toxins were eventually deciphered and countered by skilled medical ninjas. Kain imagined the impact someone like Tsunade, one of the greatest medical ninjas, could have if she were to focus on curing diseases like cancer. The ninja world had vast potential in medical research, and Kain was eager to tap into it. In the past few days, aside from appearing at school briefly, Kain had been busy balancing his company and the futures market. Though running a company drained his funds, Kain made substantial profits from the futures market. After many all-night research sessions with Carl, the two had earned at least $2 million from gold and oil trades. War always had economic consequences, and though Kain felt guilty for capitalizing on such chaos, the money was irresistible. To celebrate their growing fortune, Kain, Carl, and Connor opened a bottle of champagne, raising a toast to condemn the war, even though they were profiting from it. Connor, who had always been a bit lenient, even let the two boys have a couple of drinks despite their age. The drug wholesale and trading company was progressing steadily. Although the qualifications for operations hadn't been finalized, it was only a matter of time before they were approved. Kain discussed future plans with his employees, deciding that Mexico and parts of West Asia would be the company's initial target markets. There, the demand for medicine was high, and Kain's company could thrive with careful management. To incentivize his sales staff, Kain offered high commissions, knowing that the promise of big money would motivate them to perform. With the trading system cooling down after dropping coordinates in the ninja world, Kain knew it would be at least 2 years before he could find another trading world. Yet, he wasn't worried. The ninja world alone had enough resources and opportunities to keep him occupied for a while. 10 days after his return, Kain checked his space backpack and, once everything was in order, traveled back to the ninja world using the trading system. After leaving the hotel in the town, he headed straight to the warehouse he had rented, preparing to hire help for transporting his goods to Konoha. It's been almost 2 days since I left here, Kain thought. The time ratio between the worlds is strange, but it's manageable. There's still plenty of time. To ensure everything went smoothly, Kain issued a mission in Konoha, hiring a Chunin team to assist him in transporting his goods. The trip between the town and Konoha wasn't far, but Kain had a large quantity of supplies to move, and hiring ninjas ensured his safety. If any bandits attacked, the ninjas would protect Kain, while Kain would focus on safeguarding the goods. After arriving at Konoha's gates, the guards checked Kain's cargo before allowing him to pass. He directed the convoy to his 2 stores in Konoha and arranged for the workers to unload the supplies. "Boss, is this a new shipment?" asked Aya, the store manager. Her full name was Aya Senju, though the Senju surname had disappeared from official records when she was young. "It is," Kain replied, handing her a list. "Check the boxes against this list and make sure everything is stocked. The rest can go into the storage room in the back." Aya quickly set to work, directing the staff to move the goods to the back room, which doubled as Kain's living quarters and had a side entrance leading to the street. Kain had acquired these properties from Hiruzen Sarutobi, who had mortgaged 4 nearby houses to Kain in exchange for medicine, alleviating some of Konoha's financial struggles during the war. While Aya managed the supplies, Kain walked through the store, noting that many shelves were completely empty. The demand was clearly high, and Aya hadn't been slacking off. Almost everything had been sold within the past few days, and it was evident that supplies were still in short supply. Kain considered raising prices slightly to capitalize on the situation. After Aya organized the stockroom, Kain called her over and reviewed the inventory list. He decided to increase the prices of nearly half the items by 50% and raise the rest by 25%. Boss, isn't that a bit steep? Aya asked, surprised by the large markup. Kain sighed, feigning the helplessness of a businessman forced to make tough decisions. Aya, it's wartime. External pressures are significant. Without ninja escorts, I wouldn't even dare transport these goods myself. Aya thought it over and realized that Kain had a point. The other shops in Konoha were almost entirely out of stock, and Kain was the only one capable of bringing in supplies from the outside. Additionally, hiring ninjas for protection added to the expenses. You're right, she nodded. It makes sense. Aya, Kain said, leaning in slightly. I know you're concerned about the price hikes. Don't worry, store employees and your family can still purchase goods at the original price. Just keep it quiet. Thank you, boss. Aya said, grateful for the gesture. Though Aya wanted to bow in thanks, Kain waved her off. Small favors like this helped him build loyalty among his workers, and once his business expanded, he planned to hire more people. He also saw potential in recruiting civilians from the Senju clan, believing it would be a wise move in the long run. He had big plans for Tsunade as well, hoping to involve her in future medical research projects. Just then, Kain noticed a red-haired girl standing by the door, peering inside. She had been watching for a while but hadn't come in. Aya, who is that? Kain asked, motioning toward the mysterious girl. Chapter 15. After hearing Kain's question, Aya turned to look in the direction of the door, then waved to the red-haired girl standing outside. Boss, this is Kushina. She has been coming to the store frequently these past few days to buy chocolates and candies, Aya said, introducing Kushina to Kain with a slight smile. Kain immediately recognized her. Kushina, a Jinkraki. While he didn't want to get too close to her, he also had no intention of avoiding her. Ah, I see. A regular customer. You can take care of her, Aya. Kushina suddenly spoke up. Are you the boss? I want to buy a lot of chocolates at once. Is that okay? Kain, slightly amused, looked at Kushina and asked, as long as you have the money, you can buy as many chocolates as you want. You can even buy the whole stock. Really? Thank you, boss. Kushina exclaimed. She quickly pulled out a stack of Ryo notes from her pocket and placed them on the table. Kain counted the money. Kushina had brought out 5,000 Ryo, which was quite a large amount for a child. She intended to buy chocolates, which previously cost 200 Ryo each. Kain glanced up at her. It was quite a sum for someone so young, but he knew better than to underestimate her. 5,000 Ryo? That would get you 25 pieces of chocolate, Kain announced, his tone neutral as he called over Aya. Aya, help pack up the chocolates for her. But before he could finish, Kushina slammed her hand down on the table, her voice rising in protest. 25 pieces? Last time, I bought 10 pieces with 1,000 Ryo. This time, I should get 50. Kain raised an eyebrow in mild surprise. Well, you're pretty sharp with numbers, he remarked. Kushina scratched the back of her head, suddenly looking bashful. That's right. But don't try to flatter me, boss. I know how much I'm supposed to get. Unfortunately, the price has increased, Kain said, shrugging helplessly. Just before you came, we decided to raise the price on some items. Chocolates are now 200 Ryo each. If you don't want to pay the new price, I can return your money. Kushina's face fell. Chocolates were a luxury, and while she loved them, they were now much more expensive. She had borrowed money from Tsunade and the Waki, but asking for more was out of the question. The idea of asking Grandma Mito for money for snacks was embarrassing beyond measure. After a long pause, she finally sighed and muttered, Fine, I'll buy 25 pieces. Seeing her disappointment, Kain pretended to think for a moment before smiling. Tell you what, since you're a regular, I'll throw in an extra 5 pieces. From now on, for every 5 you buy, I'll give you 1 extra, no limits. Kushina's eyes lit up instantly. Really? Thank you so much, boss. She beamed at Kain, bowing gratefully. Thank you, boss. You're a good person, she added as she grabbed her bag of chocolates, her earlier frustration forgotten. After all, she had ended up with 30 pieces instead of 25. As she left the store with her bounty, Kain chuckled to himself. It was easy to manipulate customers by giving them small favors after raising prices. People like Kushina, who felt like they were getting a good deal, were always eager to come back for more. After Kushina was gone, Kain gestured for Aya to follow him to the neighboring store. We need to prepare this shop. I'm thinking of selling basic medical supplies like bandages, swabs, and daily medications here. Aya was slightly surprised by the plan. Boss, you're going to sell medicine here too? Kain nodded. That's right. We'll recruit a few more people to help run the place. We can start cleaning up now and aim to open the store in 3 days. Aya hesitated for a moment before speaking. Boss, I know someone who might be a good fit for the job. His name is Mirai. He used to be a ninja, but he lost his hand in battle and had to retire. He knows some medical ninjutsu, but, well, he hasn't been the same since his injury. Aya looked a bit uneasy. Mirai was the husband of her friend, and despite receiving compensation after his injury, it hadn't lasted long. Unable to work, he had fallen into a state of depression, ashamed to rely on his wife for support. Kain thought for a moment. If he knows medical ninjutsu, that could be useful. Tell him the pay will be the same as yours, and ask if he's interested in joining us. Aya smiled, clearly relieved. Thank you, boss. I'll talk to him right away. Good. We'll also need 2 more people for physical work, but make sure they're trustworthy. I don't want anyone who steals or slacks off. Understood. I won't let you down. With that, Aya left to find Mirai and the other potential employees. Kain, meanwhile, busied himself with the inventory and customer transactions while Aya was gone. Kain knew he couldn't stay in Konoha forever. Once the war subsided, his plans would take him beyond the village's walls. His goal was to establish a foothold in the Land of Fire and then slowly expand his influence into the smaller surrounding countries. Medicine and food were profitable industries, but they had their limits, especially with Konoha's monopoly on medicine for the time being. The entertainment industry, maybe that's something worth exploring, Kain mused aloud. He remembered how much money Jiraiya had made from writing a few popular novels. Behind Kain was an entire world of stories that hadn't been introduced to this one yet. If he played his cards right, he could trigger a cultural renaissance in the ninja world. He had already brought 10 novels with him, enough to start a small revolution in entertainment. If he introduced them slowly, allowing demand to build, it could be a lucrative side business. Let's see where this goes, he thought with a smirk, already envisioning the possibilities. With control over both goods and culture, he could gradually influence the flow of public opinion across the ninja world, one step at a time. Chapter 16. Sure enough, you're back. How about going for a drink tonight? Tsunade's voice came from the entrance as the sky darkened. She had stopped by Kain's food store and found him overseeing some workers who were packing up items next door. She greeted him with a friendly smile. Kain shook his head politely. There's no need for that, Tsunade-san. I'm still busy organizing my place, and I don't think I have much time tonight. Just as he finished speaking, Aya, the store manager, stepped forward. After bowing slightly to both of them, she respectfully interrupted their conversation. If you're talking about cleaning the yard where Kain-san lives, you could leave that to me. I know where to buy household items and how to organize them quickly. Kain suppressed a sigh. While Aya's intentions were good, she had completely misunderstood him. He had been making an excuse to avoid going out, and now she had unwittingly backed him into a corner. Tsunade had already tracked him down that evening, no doubt. She'd been tipped off by someone, and Kain had a pretty good idea of who that might have been. Tsunade chuckled, stepping closer and patting Kain on the shoulder. Aya's right. You should come with me. Resigned, Kain nodded. Fine. I'll leave my place in your capable hands, Manager Aya. He handed Aya some money for shopping and cleaning supplies before turning to follow Tsunade. She was known for 2 things, her love of gambling and her passion for drinking. It seemed she was determined to indulge in the latter tonight. Aya watched them leave, feeling somewhat pleased. This is the first time Kain-san has called me Manager Aya. Maybe that means he's recognizing my abilities, she thought to herself. With that in mind, she returned to the store, planning to enlist a few more hands to help tidy up Kain's living quarters. While the space was already clean, it lacked proper furniture. At the izakaya, Tsunade effortlessly ordered a few bottles of sake and several plates of skewers. Kain, on the other hand, kept it simple. He ordered tea and a bowl of noodles, feeling genuinely hungry. Since he couldn't eat at home, he figured he might as well have something substantial here. When the sake arrived, Tsunade offered him a drink, but Kain politely declined. She grumbled something about him being boring and happily downed a few glasses on her own. "Tsunade-san," Kain began after taking a few bites of noodles, "we've known each other for a while now. Why don't you go ahead and tell me why you're here?" Tsunade's face was slightly flushed, likely from the alcohol. "Did you figure it out already?" she said with a slight slur. "Since you've already seen through me, I won't waste time. Konoha needs another batch of medicines, Kain-san. This time, we need a lot more." Kain paused. He had anticipated that Konoha might come to him again, given the constant flow of wounded ninjas from the battlefield. Supplies were always running low, especially with the ongoing conflict in the Land of Grass, and now the skirmishes with other villages were ramping up once more. Although the war in the Land of Rain had mostly ended, tensions with Cloud Shinobi and Kirigakure were rising, creating new demand for medical supplies. Kain leaned back in his chair and asked, "The same type and quantity of medicines as before? Is that what Konoha wants?" "Yes," Tsunade confirmed. She hesitated for a moment, then added, "We hope you can sell the entire batch to Konoha." Kain gave her a long look, sensing there was more to the story. "But Konoha's finances are tight, and there's no money to buy medicine right now, correct?" Tsunade sighed, rolling her eyes as she poured herself another glass of sake. "I really can't hide anything from you, can I?" It wasn't easy for her to admit the village's financial struggles, and negotiating with Kain had never been simple. He was always direct, and last time, he had firmly refused any deals that weren't clear-cut. "So, you want me to provide the medicine on credit?" Kain asked. Tsunade set her glass down and gave him a pleading look. "Yes. Would that be possible?" Kain's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, Tsunade-san, but I can't extend credit for medicine. If Konoha doesn't have the funds, I'd be willing to accept gold, jewelry, or other valuables in exchange." Tsunade grimaced, knowing this was exactly what she had feared. "Gold and jewelry, hey? I'll need to ask the Hokage about that. But the village is really struggling right now. The daimyo hasn't provided any funding in quite some time." Before she could continue, Kain raised his hand to stop her. "Please, Tsunade-san, don't share confidential details about Konoha's financial situation with me. I'm just a businessman. The inner workings of the village are none of my concern." Tsunade blinked, realizing she had nearly let slip too much in her slightly tipsy state. She apologized softly. "I tend to lose control of my mouth when I've had too much to drink. I'll be more careful. By the way, how's Aya doing with her work?" "She's doing well. I've already promised her that when the business expands, her relatives will be prioritized for employment." "Thank you for that, Kain. Honestly, the Senju clan can't accommodate them anymore," Tsunade said, sounding relieved. Many of her clan members had fought bravely on the battlefield, and the Senju clan's resources were stretched thin. The fact that Kain was offering them jobs was a huge help. Kain nodded. "Speaking of expansion, if I decide to open shops in other parts of the Land of Fire, would people like Aya be allowed to leave the village to help?" "Of course," Tsunade replied casually. "Some of them know ninjutsu, but they're not full-fledged ninjas, so they can leave the village without restrictions." Kain felt a sense of relief. Having trustworthy people like Aya and her family working for him, even outside Konoha, would give him more peace of mind. After a few more minutes of casual conversation, Kain excused himself, leaving Tsunade to enjoy her sake. The following day, Kain checked in with Aya about the progress of the pharmacy and began making plans for a trip to the capital of the Land of Fire. The capital had the largest bookstore in the region, and Kain was confident that the 10 novels he had brought with him would be well received. In a world plagued by war and uncertainty, he believed that literature, especially entertaining and even risque content, would offer people a much-needed escape. Just as Kain was about to leave Konoha, however, an Anbu ninja appeared in front of him. "Mr. Kain, Lord Hokage wishes to meet with you," the masked figure said. Chapter 17. Upon arriving at the Hokage's office, Kain noticed that in addition to Tsunade, Hiruzen Sarutobi, Yudin Koharu, and Mitokedo Homura were also present. Kain-san, I apologize for the sudden invitation, but we have an important matter to discuss. Hiruzen Sarutobi greeted him with a polite tone, even though the situation was quite urgent. Konoha's medical ninjas were spread thin, and the village heavily relied on the medicine that Kain provided. His medicines had proven to increase the survival rate of the wounded by 50 to 60%, which was crucial in the ongoing war. Without these medicines, the village risked suffering greater losses. Kain's supplies had become vital for Konoha to sustain its forces and prevent heavy casualties. I understand what the third Hokage means, Kain responded. However, I cannot offer the medicines on credit. In fact, I had to pay a large sum for the last batch of supplies. If I can't recoup those funds, I won't be able to provide further medicines in the future, and you might have to find another supplier. Kain wasn't interested in hearing a long explanation. He wanted to cut to the chase. Credit and price were non-negotiable for him. If he agreed to loosen his standards now, it would set a bad precedent. Future negotiations could easily become more difficult if he showed leniency, and it was clear to him that Konoha would take advantage of that. Hiruzen sighed internally, understanding the businessman's standpoint. He was trying to navigate the fine line between Konoha's financial difficulties and Kain's firm stance. Still, the third Hokage forced a smile and asked, "Then, what kind of collateral would you accept?" It was clear that Konoha didn't have the upper hand in this situation. They needed Kain more than he needed them, but Hiruzen couldn't afford to let those medicines slip away to another village. Despite numerous attempts, Hiruzen's Anbu had failed to uncover how Kain was smuggling the medicines in. It remained a mystery. "I'm willing to accept various forms of collateral," Kain began, "including jewelry, jade, gold ornaments, or even utensils that are a few hundred years old. However, the pricing power remains with me, and I assure you, I won't deliberately undervalue them." As soon as Kain mentioned setting his own prices, Yudin Koharu's expression soured. She had tried inflating the value of a few houses during a previous transaction, and she assumed Kain was subtly calling her out. "Alternatively, you can offer me protection," Kain continued. "I'm heading to the capital of the Land of Fire for some business negotiations, and I could use some guards." Although Kain had firearms in his backpack for protection, he knew they wouldn't be enough if he encountered a Janin-level attack. He needed skilled ninjas to ensure his safety. Mitokedo Homura, who had been silent until now, suddenly asked, "Would you accept ninjutsu scrolls as collateral?" Konoha has a vast collection. Ninjutsu scrolls? Kain shook his head. "No, Elder Homura. I'm not a ninja. Ninjutsu scrolls hold no value to me. A best-selling novel would be far more appealing." With that, Mitokedo Homura seemed to accept Kain's position and fell silent. After this exchange, Hiruzen Sarutobi nodded. "Very well, Kain-san. Konoha will require the same amount of medicine as before. We'll send you a list of collateral for you to review." Kain agreed, and an Anbu agent escorted him out of the Hokage building. The medicines were stored in the warehouse behind Kain's food store, ready to be distributed between the pharmacy and Konoha's immediate needs. Later that afternoon, after a meal, Kain was again summoned to the Hokage building. This time, however, he wasn't taken to Hiruzen's office. Instead, Anbu led him to a different house, where only Mitokedo Homura was present. "Kain-san, here is the list of collateral for this transaction," Homura said, handing Kain a detailed inventory and gesturing toward a box on the table. The box contained 40 kilograms of gold, 100 pieces of jewelry, a separate box of accessories, and over 30 antique utensils. Kain examined the items closely. Some of the antique utensils were more casually arranged, clearly indicating they had been passed down through generations. Mitokedo Homura confirmed this, explaining that they were contributions from the Senju clan, dating back at least 500 years. These antiques had a long heritage, but for the most part, they didn't hold much value to Kain. However, he realized that, with the right marketing, he could present them as cultural treasures and turn a considerable profit. Moving on, Kain inspected the jewelry and gemstones. Most of the gems appeared legitimate, though some had visible cracks or poor quality, which he promptly rejected. This clearly embarrassed Mitokedo Homura, who silently cursed Yudin Koharu for including them. Finally, Kain opened the box of accessories, most of which seemed authentic. But when he picked up two pieces that still had traces of dried blood, he paused. These items were probably looted by the Root Division, and Mitokedo Homura, recognizing Kain's reaction, quickly diverted his gaze, pretending to notice something wrong with the room's corners. The situation was clear: Danzo's division had been involved in some illicit activities. Other than what I've set aside, this looks acceptable, Elder Homura, Kain finally said, closing the box. Mitokado Homura nodded in agreement. The remaining rejected items would likely be used to settle housing debts. After all, Konoha had plenty of houses, especially with the village expanding. The next thing to discuss is the commissioned tasks, Kain reminded him. Of course, Mitokado Homura replied. We'll need to involve the mission team to provide a more detailed assessment. Hiruzen Sarutobi might allow some flexibility when it came to trade items, but the missions were Konoha's reputation on the line. Neither Sarutobi nor Mitokado Homura would tolerate any tampering when it came to the village's credibility. Chapter 18. Konoha's missions are categorized into 5 levels: D, C, B, A, and S. A-level and S-level tasks are extremely difficult, typically involving sensitive matters related to other nations, and they usually require at least Jonin-level expertise to complete. Therefore, individuals or common entities rarely have the authority to issue such missions unless they hold high-ranking positions, like the daimyo of the Land of Fire or similarly influential officials. These figures, due to their strong sway over Konoha, can commission AORS-level missions, but for ordinary people, the highest they can request is a B-level task. Kain's upcoming mission was assessed as a B-level task, primarily due to the inherent dangers that come with traveling across the Land of Fire. The potential for encounters with wandering ninjas, rogue samurai, and bandits after the war was high. Conflict inevitably breeds these groups, and Kain's journey could expose him to such threats. Since Kain's mission would take a considerable amount of time, the mission team in Konoha set the reward at 200,000 ryo. 2 teams, each led by a Jonin, would accompany Kain on his journey starting the next day. However, this single mission was not enough to settle the medical debt Konoha owed to Kain. He would need to commission several more missions like this to balance the scales. Kain planned to return to his store to inform Aya about his impending departure. She would be responsible for managing the 2 stores in Konoha during his absence. Fortunately, the shops weren't facing any major challenges at the moment, aside from routine tasks like restocking merchandise and bookkeeping. They had recruited 8 employees to help run the stores smoothly. While walking into the store, Kain noticed several Ninja Academy students shopping. Aya, there are guests right now. We can talk later, he said before heading to the living quarters in the backyard. A short while later, Kain heard someone approach the door. Assuming it was Aya, he said, "Come in, Aya." However, to his surprise, it wasn't Aya who entered but a girl with red hair and a round face, Uzumaki Kushina. She looked slightly flustered as she entered. "Oh, you're Kushina, right?" Kain asked, pretending to recall her name after a brief moment of thought. "If you're here to buy something, please go to the front of the store. This is my private living area." Embarrassed, Kushina bowed and apologized. "I'm sorry, boss, but I actually wanted to ask you something." Kain waited for a few moments, hoping she would realize her mistake and leave. However, after a few seconds of awkward silence, he realized she wasn't going anywhere. With a resigned sigh, he stood up and said, "All right, come in and sit down. I'll make some tea." "Thank you, boss," Kushina replied, taking a seat and curiously glancing around Kain's living space as she waited. Kain poured the tea and, eager to resolve the situation quickly, asked, "So, Kushina, what did you need my help with?" Kushina, looking hopeful, said, "Boss, the chocolates you sell are so popular. I was hoping to reserve some for myself." It turned out that she had come to Kain's private area because the store had been too crowded earlier, and she hadn't been able to get her hands on any of the chocolates before they sold out. "Already sold out again? I didn't realize the business was doing so well," Kain mused aloud. It dawned on him that he might be able to capitalize on the growing demand by opening a candy factory in the ninja world. To his knowledge, there wasn't a particularly famous sweet in this world, with the most iconic treats in Konoha being dango and anko dumplings, largely due to someone's endorsement. Considering his monopoly on desserts like chocolates and lollipops, Kain realized there was immense potential in this untapped market. In the American market, sweets generated billions of dollars in revenue. If he could replicate even a fraction of that success in the Land of Fire, Kain could dominate the confectionery industry within a few years. This thought sparked a new business plan in his mind. He would need to scout for suitable locations to open a factory after leaving Konoha. "Boss? Boss?" Kushina's voice interrupted his thoughts, and Kain snapped out of his reverie. Sorry, I got a little distracted there, Kain apologized. You mentioned making a reservation. How many chocolates are you looking to order? Kushina thought for a moment and then replied, 100. Alright, 100 chocolates will be 20,000 ryo. Plus, I'll throw in the extra 20 pieces I promised you last time, so a total of 120, Kain said, nodding. He then added, but don't forget if you eat too much chocolate, you'll gain weight, so make sure to balance it out with enough exercise. That's right, that's right. Kushina agreed eagerly, completely unconcerned about the weight warning. She recalled how quickly the 30 chocolates she bought last time had been eaten, with even Tsunade and Nawaka taking some from her stash. With her intense daily training, Kushina felt no guilt about indulging in her favorite treat after a hard day of work. Okay, be sure to pay Aya at the counter when you leave, and I'll let you know as soon as the next batch of desserts arrives, Kain said, mentally preparing to wrap up the conversation. Kushina blinked in surprise. You mean I still have to pay? Of course. Kain responded with a raised brow. A reservation is still a purchase. You need to put down at least a deposit. Seeing the surprise on Kushina's face, Kain asked suspiciously, you don't have the money, do you? Of course I do. Kushina declared, but her guilty tone gave her away. Without waiting for a response, she quickly stood up and made her way out, presumably to find some money to pay for her order. As Kain watched her leave, he reflected on how the first batch of chocolates had barely gained recognition, but now, there was a frenzy surrounding his products. The customers today were mostly Ninja Academy students, a demographic that could actually afford the expensive snacks thanks to their ability to earn money from simple D-level missions. Even the youngest genin could easily complete 3 such missions in a day, earning between 500 and 10,000 ryo per task. The ninja world was truly a land of opportunity, with vast, underdeveloped markets. Kain's mind buzzed with plans to expand his business. In the next 3 to 5 years, he was determined to establish a business empire so influential that it could sway decision-making in Konoha village. His ultimate goal, however, was to use this power to extend his influence into the Marvel world. After explaining his departure plans to Aya, Kain prepared for his journey. The mission included 2 teams of Konoha ninjas, consisting of 2 Chunin and 4 Genin. Given that Konoha was still in the midst of the war, ninja teams were smaller than usual, with 1 Chunin typically leading 2 Genin. Still, with 6 ninjas in total, Kain felt confident about his safety during the trip across the Land of Fire. In addition to the ninja guards, there was also a coachman. Kain had purchased 2 carriages for the journey, one for transporting supplies and the other, a more luxurious model, for his personal use. The latter was spacious enough to allow Kain to travel comfortably and even sleep soundly at night. Once everything was ready, Kain set off from Konoha village. Chapter 19. Okay, what a good book. The owner of Lishun bookstore, located in the capital of the Land of Fire, exclaimed in excitement as he finished reading the manuscript Kain had given him. The manuscript engrossed him so thoroughly that he was unable to pull himself away until he reached the end of the first volume. Realizing he had been swept up in the story, the owner, Mickey, regained his composure and smiled sheepishly at Kain. After a moment, still intrigued by the manuscript, Mickey couldn't resist asking, Kain-san, is there more to this book? A sequel perhaps? Kain, sensing the owner's eagerness, responded with confidence, of course, the entire novel is complete. But Mickey-san, shouldn't we discuss business first? Kain was fully confident in the potential of his novels. The literary landscape of the ninja world was, at best, barren. Before arriving at Lishun bookstore, Kain had perused several bestsellers, only to find them lackluster and unappealing. They were predictable, full of excessive moral preaching, and overall devoid of the thrilling elements that make for a captivating story. Given this, Kain knew that his books originating from another world had the potential to become instant hits. Of course, let's talk business, Mickey said with a smile. With your level of writing, Kain-san, I can offer you 20% of the profit. However, Kain shook his head, cutting Mickey off. Mickey-san, this offer feels a bit lacking in sincerity. Before coming here, I took a look at the so-called bestsellers in your store. Frankly, they don't hold a candle to what I have to offer. Moreover, I have 2 more novels of the same caliber as the one you just read. If this is your best offer, I'm afraid I'll have to take my leave. Wait. Mickey quickly interjected, alarmed by the prospect of losing such a valuable opportunity. Kain-san, Did you say you have 2 more novels of equal quality? Could I perhaps take a look at them? Of course, Kain replied, but I advise you not to read them all at once. Otherwise, you won't have time to get any work done. With that, Kain pulled 2 more manuscripts from his backpack and handed them to Mickey. Unable to contain his curiosity, Mickey eagerly began reading the first manuscript. It wasn't long before he was completely absorbed in the story, just as he had been with the first book. Mickey was not just any bookstore owner. He prided himself on his ability to recognize good literature, and his instincts told him that these manuscripts were special. After a few minutes, Kain cleared his throat, bringing Mickey out of his reverie. Embarrassed, Mickey chuckled and picked up the last manuscript to read. By the time he finished, he was left breathless, both from the compelling narratives and from the realization that he had stumbled upon 3 gold mines. I'll offer you 37% of the profits, Kain-san, Mickey said, now wearing a serious expression. This is the highest offer you'll find anywhere in the ninja world. I guarantee it. Kain smiled, knowing that he had gotten the best deal. It's a deal, Mickey-san. Once the contract is signed, I'll hand over the first 3 volumes of each novel. Mickey and Kain quickly drafted and signed a contract. True to his word, Kain handed over the manuscripts for the first 3 volumes of each novel. He also suggested that Mickey consider opening a branch in Konoha, as it represented a significant untapped market. Jiraiya had earned hundreds of millions from just 3 books, and Kain saw no reason why he couldn't replicate that success. With minimal effort, he could generate a continuous stream of revenue. After sealing the deal with Lishun Bookstore, Kain decided to explore the capital of the Land of Fire. The city was many times more prosperous than Konoha, with a population that dwarfed that of the hidden village. Accompanied by 2 teams of Konoha shinobi as guards, Kain indulged in the city's finest food and entertainment. Although the team leader, Ichnin, initially refused Kain's offer to join him for a meal, Kain and the 4 genin in the group managed to persuade him. They assured him that as long as he avoided alcohol and maintained his composure, there would be no violation of shinobi protocol. After all, they were in the capital of the Land of Fire, a relatively safe place. Their camaraderie, fueled by good food and company, ensured that when they returned to Konoha, the shinobi's report on Kain's mission would be favorable, even slightly embellished in his favor. For 2 days, Kain wandered through the Land of Fire's capital, gathering information about the region's economy and development. He concluded that the ninja world's economy was roughly equivalent to that of Earth in the 1970s. Industrialization had only just begun, and many essential goods were in short supply. However, the nobles and daimyos paid little attention to industrial growth, allowing Kain ample opportunity to establish a foothold. The dessert factory was only his first step. Next, Kain planned to control food production and labor. Once he had accumulated enough resources within the Land of Fire, he would expand his influence to smaller, less stable nations without strong ninja villages. These countries would be easy to dominate, providing Kain with an opportunity to amass political and economic power effortlessly. After leaving the capital, Kain visited several prosperous towns in the Land of Fire, taking notes along the way. Eventually, he settled on a town near Konoha to establish his dessert factory. It was close enough to the hidden village to ensure safety but far enough to avoid unnecessary attention. Moreover, the local civilian population would provide a steady source of labor. To manage the factory, Kain planned to recruit more people from the Senju family, much like Aya. The family's reputation and values would ensure that his business was in good hands. The only thing left would be to train the new recruits in the necessary professional skills. Kain immediately set about acquiring land for the factory. He met with officials from the Land of Fire, hired a construction team, and had a large workshop and warehouse built to his specifications. The initial investment cost him several million ryo, but the land, factory, and warehouse were only the beginning. Kain still needed to acquire specialized production equipment, which the ninja world did not yet have. For that, he planned to return to the Marvel world, where he could purchase outdated but functional machinery at a fraction of the cost. In the meantime, he arranged for the cultivation of cocoa trees near the factory, ensuring a local supply of raw materials for his dessert production. After spending 3 more days overseeing the construction of his factory, Kain returned to Konoha. By that time, the construction was nearly complete, and he had already laid the groundwork for his next major venture. Chapter 20. Boss, you're back. Aya greeted Kain with a smile when she saw him returning. Following close behind her was another individual, missing an arm Mirai. It had been a while since Kain left Konoha, and during his absence, the Kain Pharmacy had opened for business. Mirai, who had trained in medical ninjutsu, joined the workforce shortly after its launch. "Yeah, I'm back," Kain replied, then turned to Mirai. "I'm counting on you for the Kain Pharmacy. Having a store manager who knows medical ninjutsu really puts my mind at ease." Mirai felt moved by Kain's words. Despite his disability, Kain entrusted him with significant responsibilities, which made him feel valued. He quickly saluted and said, "Don't worry, boss. I'll work hard." Kain nodded in approval and walked into the store to check the recent sales reports. The snack sales remained strong, reaffirming the age-old wisdom that children and women are the biggest spenders. Once the dessert factory opened, Kain's desserts could be distributed across the entire Land of Fire. Although other food items sold reasonably well, Kain noticed that the demand for food had reached a ceiling. The ninja population in Konoha had their own established supply chains, and most of the customers who bought from Kain's store were civilians, a group that wasn't particularly large. Going forward, Kain decided to phase out selling food from his space backpack. Although American food was cheap, importing it and selling it with the backpack wasn't worth the trouble. Instead, he planned to focus on reselling food in smaller countries that could yield more significant profits. Kain smiled to himself, noting that while he might take a similar approach as the notorious Kato in dominating small countries, he wasn't foolish enough to meet the same fate. "Boss, Kushina mentioned that you allowed her to pre-order desserts," Aya reported, pulling Kain out of his thoughts. After others found out, many people started doing the same. "Here's the list of reservations and the total orders." Aya handed Kain the list. After skimming through it, he raised an eyebrow. "Over 80 people? That's more than 3 million ryo. I didn't realize Konoha had this many people interested in desserts." Aya nodded, adding, "Yes, even some ninjas have made reservations. Many of them have developed a liking for chocolate, even me." She cleared her throat, embarrassed to admit she had secretly bought some for herself and her children. The desserts were so delicious that it became hard to resist indulging. "I see," Kain said with a small chuckle. "I'll handle this. For now, I have something else to ask of you." Aya's face turned serious as Kain continued, "I need you to take charge of a business outside Konoha for me. You'll need to leave the store in the hands of someone else, and I want you to recruit more staff." Kain was referring to the dessert factory in town. It was crucial to have someone trustworthy oversee its operations, and while Kain hadn't known Aya for long, she had proven herself reliable and honest. The only person he could entrust with this job was her. Aya took a moment to think before nodding decisively. "I understand, boss. Many people from the Senju clan don't have much to do. If there's a job for them, they'll definitely be willing to help." Kain smiled. "Good. You'll be in charge of hiring. The salary is 80,000 ryo a month, almost as much as several high-quality D-rank missions." Aya's eyes widened slightly at the generous offer, but she quickly composed herself. Kain continued, "Although town isn't far from Konoha, accidents can happen. Be careful when you go, and I'll recruit some guards to protect the factory." Aya smiled, grateful for the concern. "Don't worry, boss. We'll be safe. After all, we do know some basic ninjutsu. The Senju clan may not be what it once was, but we can still handle ourselves." This current generation of the Senju clan still carried a sense of duty to protect Konoha. Aya, for instance, planned to send her child to the ninja academy once he turned 6. In the meantime, like many other Senju parents, she was personally handling her son's pre-academy training. Kain chuckled. "I underestimated you all. Well, that's good. I'll take you to town myself. Besides you, there will be 8 others joining. You can pick the team yourself. I trust your judgment." Aya smiled gratefully. "Thank you, boss. I won't let you down." Feeling an even greater sense of responsibility, Aya was determined to prove herself worthy of Kain's trust. Without him, she and many of her relatives would still be struggling to find stable, well-paying work. Once Aya gathered the team, Kain planned to take them to town to begin working on the dessert factory. 4 of the staff members would manage the factory's operations, while the remaining 5 would oversee the cocoa tree plantations. The land around town wasn't perfect for growing cocoa, but it would suffice for now. Kain had bigger plans for the future, expanding his influence into the land of tea, which was much better suited for cocoa cultivation. As he managed his growing business, Kain also kept a close eye on the brewing Second Shinobi World War. Recently, many ninjas had returned to Konoha, especially those from the Land of Rain battlefield. After Rain Shinobi's surrender, Sand Shinobi soon followed suit, retreating to their borders and signaling the end of the conflict. Despite the retreat, Sand Shinobi was far from fully cooperating. They hadn't yet signed the peace treaty Konoha had proposed, likely because the terms, largely influenced by Danzo's hawkish faction, were highly exploitative. Though Konoha had shown leniency toward Rain Shinobi, they sought to extract compensation from Sand Shinobi. While the battlefield seemed to be quieting down, there was one topic Kain heard discussed repeatedly among the returning ninjas: the terrifying Jinchuriki unleashed by Sand Shinobi. While no one explicitly mentioned its name, Kain could infer from their descriptions that they were talking about Shikaku, the one-tailed beast. Shikaku's wind-style jutsu, described as natural disasters in their own right, spread like wildfire among the Konoha ranks. Thankfully, Danzo and Orochimaru had managed to find a way to counter the beast. Otherwise, Konoha's forces would have suffered devastating losses. However, Kain knew this level of conflict was beyond his current influence. His goal remained clear: expand his power base as quickly as possible. Ninjas were a strange group, Kain mused. Though many possessed extraordinary power, they were still bound by the identity of being ninjas, servants to the powerful and wealthy. Even a figure like Madara Uchiha had nearly escaped this fate, only to be brought back down by the might of Hashirama Senju. For now, Kain's ambitions would have to simmer in the background. There was still much work to do in expanding his business and laying the groundwork for his future endeavors.
Thanks for listening.